Welcome, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Assembly meeting for June 21st. And first, I'd like to welcome everybody who's here in the audience, those who are home, either watching on TV or the Internet. Thank you for joining us this evening. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Assemblymember Domboski.
Present.
Assemblymember Croft. Assemblymember Evans.
Here.
Assemblymember Flynn. Chair Gray Jackson.
Honored to be here.
Vice Chair Trainee.
Present.
Assemblymember Steele.
Here.
Assemblymember Peterson.
Present.
Assemblymember Starr.
Here.
Assemblymember Dunbar.
Here.
Assemblymember Whittleton.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Ms. Brown, visiting from New Jersey, would you come to the podium and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Mary, that's the problem when you stay with her.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are now down to item number 4, minutes of previous meeting. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of the March 8th meeting?
So moved, Madam Chair.
I have a second. Ask unanimous approval.
Madam Chair.
Ms. Domboski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a quick question for the clerk, and I'm sorry I didn't call ahead of time. In these initial minutes, we're on 4A, right?
Yes.
We're on 4A.
In the initial minutes, it has, Madam Chair, yourself marked as absent, and then throughout, oh, never mind. Disregard. I misread it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. Ask unanimous approval of the minutes for March 8th meeting. See no objection. Those minutes are approved. Can I have a motion to
Move to
approve?
approve the minutes of March 22nd, 2016, Madam Chair.
Second.
Item 4B.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee, Ms. Domboski. Ask unanimous approval. Seeing no objection, those minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda, the Mayor's report. Mr. Mayor.
Nothing to report at this time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Assembly Chair's report. Hello again, everyone. I also serve as the Chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, and we had a meeting on Thursday, June 16th, and at that meeting, the OMB Director provided the following information. He advised us that OMB is preparing and reviewing the budget calendar to develop the 2017 operating and capital budgets with the Mayor's office. He also advised us that the preliminary 2017 budget calendar is going to be available next week and distributed to all Assembly members. The Chief Fiscal Officer reported that the municipality is on target with expenditures. The Budget Advisory Commission Chair reported that the Commission did meet in June, but is going to meet in July and will be discussing Anchorage School District bonds. The committee also received a report on SAP, an update on SAP as follows. There are approximately 15 training workshops that are going to be scheduled. The budget to actual spending to date was $324,000 under budget. In regard to tasks, the project is 79% ahead of schedule and 26% behind schedule, but this does not reflect the overall project progress. As suggested by the Budget Advisory Commission's report on property tax exemptions, the committee also continued its efforts by discussing and reviewing the nonprofit property tax exemptions. The property appraiser provided a history of the annual nonprofit recertification requirement that was in place from 2009 to 2011, and he also advised us that they really need an additional position in the property appraisal office in order to create a systematic and a cyclical auditing program of the nonprofit exemptions. Property appraiser will be working diligently to ensure that those receiving nonprofit exemption status really qualify for this exemption. The next meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee will be July 21st from 12 to 1 in the Assembly Conference Room, City Hall, Room 155. Committee reports. We will start with you, Ms. Domboski.
Madam Chair, I don't have any report, but if you'll indulge me just a moment, I would just like to say, it wasn't mentioned yet, but I'm sure many of us here in the room tonight witnessed the tragic events in Orlando, and I think it's absolutely appropriate for the municipality of Anchorage as legislators for us to acknowledge the act of terrorism that happened in Orlando and just say, you know, those events are tragic. Our thoughts, our prayers, our hearts go out to the victims and their families.
Ms. Domboski, I really appreciate you mentioning that. As a matter of fact, I was going to ask for a moment of silence, so thank you, and I'm asking that we take a moment of silence to recognize that horrific event, especially considering that this week is Pride Fest. May we have a moment of silence, please? Thank you. Anything else, Ms. Domboski? Mr. Croft. Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Homelessness Committee met on the 15th of the month. We received an update from the Municipal Homeless Coordinator regarding the status of the mayor's efforts to coordinate services. We also had an update from a number of the nonprofit providers that are cooperating in that effort. And that pretty much took the whole meeting. We had a large participation from stakeholders and other interested citizens attending that meeting. The Public Safety Committee meets next on July 6th, and that'll be in room 155 of City Hall. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The AMATS Policy Committee will convene this Thursday, 1:30 at City Hall, room 835.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Trainee.
Nothing, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Steele.
The Enterprise Committee met on the 16th, and we heard from AWW, MLNP, and Merrill Field. Merrill Field, it had been a while since we'd talked to him. Boy, there's a lot going on out there. If you haven't looked to the south when you drive by on 5th. MLNP reported on some contract issues on the Plant 2A. They're getting down towards the end, and so there's a lot going on there. AWW talked to us about their strategic plan and laid out goals, and gave us some heads up on some items that are coming up in terms of Girdwood, Asplin water treatment, and so on and so forth. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tomorrow at noon, the Ethics and Election Committee will be meeting in City Hall, room 240. We will be receiving updates about the rewrite of the Ethics Code and also given an update on the progress towards being ready for vote by mail next April. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Starr.
From the audit department, we're having some struggles being able to close out the CAFR, the financial reports from last year. I've briefly spoken to the CFO about the need to prepare some sort of documents. The CAFR is used in many ways, not only for our review and acceptance, but also our lending agencies and our rating groups look at the health of our finances as summarized in that report. So we'll have to get somewhat creative. The CFO apparently is communicating either through a letter or tendering draft financials, which is always a little bit dicey. Primarily it's relating from our inability to book the appropriate liabilities and requirements for contributions down in the PERS and TERS coming out of Juneau. It may be, Madam Chair, that we just take a policy call on that and either estimate or go forward so that we can close out the CAFR. It draws, I believe, inappropriate attention to the fiscal health of the city when we delay financials and draft financials. It may raise the eyebrows of others. So we usually see that report coming up in the next end of June, if you will. So I think maybe you and I can speak offline as to what the best strategy would be to present a policy call to the Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Mr. Trainee, you have a question?
Mr. Starr, I understand on Sunday you addressed the Cluna Powwow.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, because it's a good event.
It's more than a good event. I think the recognition that the native village of Eklutna is the only native village inside the boundaries of the municipality of Anchorage goes oftentimes overlooked. It's a tremendous resource. The idea that the Mayor Berkowitz, came out. It was actually a moving discussion. It is every 2 years that they hold a powwow. But this year we were able to announce a project that both the mayor and I are working on, and that's to continue to provide some overlay protections to that village. And it beats their heart faster when we talk about that sort of repairing. And the mayor did a wonderful job addressing that group. And I think we've got some things to be proud of as this policy body on the overlay district. So thanks for bringing it up. It was moving for me, and the native village of Eklutna and the elders that all showed up was fantastic. So
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of us showed up on Saturdays, so we didn't get to hear your comments, but
yeah,
I appreciate
it. It was
that.
good, and those that went out there, it's wonderful. You should do it every other year when it happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr.
It was wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Trainee, Mr. Starr. Mr. Dunbar.
Nothing to report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Weddleton.
Nothing to report, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Trainee, may I have a motion to incorporate the addendum?
Chair, move to incorporate the addendum to the agenda and the laid on the table items.
Can I have a second? Thank you. Addendum to the agenda. Item 9D15, Assembly Memorandum 441-2016, 2016-2017 application for a new wholesale malt beverage and wine liquor license for White Mountain Beverage LLC, DBA K&L Distributors, Alaska Liquor License number 5494. Item 9D16, Assembly Memorandum AM 442, 2016, 2017, McBest Enterprises LLC, DBA Alaska Denali Winery, LL number 5090. 9D17, Assembly Memorandum AM 443, 2016, recommendation of award to QAP General Contractors to provide construction services for the Arctic Boulevard Reconstruction Phase 3 project. Item 9E6, Information Report, AIM 77, 2016, Municipal Marijuana License Status Report, applications received through June 17, 2016. Item 914K, Summary of Economic Effects for AO 2016-69 Town Square No Smoking. Laid on table item, it's one item, item 9F8, AO 2016-76, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly amending Anchorage Municipal Code Title 15, Environmental Protection, to amend the provisions related to the Housing, Maintenance, and Occupancy Code. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Thank you, Madam Clerk. Please vote on incorporating the addendum and the laid-on-table items. That was approved unanimously. Thank you, Madam Clerk. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Now we'll go to items that anyone wishes to pull, and we will start with Mr. Weddleton.
Nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Dunbar.
Nothing this time, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Starr.
No items.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No items this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Steele.
No items.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Trainee.
9D3, Madam Chair, on page 3.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 9 Alpha 3 for presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Evans.
Number 9 Alpha 2 for presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Croft.
Nothing, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Ms. Zimbalski.
9 Delta 2.
Anything else, Ms. Zimbalski?
No, thank you.
Can somebody pull item 9A1?
9A1.
Thank you, Ms. Zimbalski.
Pull item 9E6. I missed that.
Mr. Trainee, you want to pull 9E6?
E as in echo.
E as an
It's
echo?
an echo.
On the addendum.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Okay, I'm going to go over all the items that were pulled. If I miss any, I'm sure you'll let me know. Item 9A1, 9A2, 9A3, 9D3, 9D2, 9D3. On the addendum, 9E6. Did I miss anything? Okay, excellent. Now we'll go back to items that were pulled. We are...
Let's vote on it.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I'm so glad you're here. Please vote on the consent agenda. That was approved unanimously, other than the items that we've pulled. Okay, now we'll go back to items that were pulled. Item 9A1, AR 2016-176, And a resolution recognizing and honoring Linda L. Barbara Wiltsey, P.E., for more than 32 years of excellent public service with the municipality of Anchorage. We have someone to read, and someone's presenting. Ms. Barbara, please come to the podium. Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. May I have a second? Thank you.
What you asking?
Ask unanimous approval. Seeing no objections, this resolution is approved. Who's reading?
Are you going to speak?
Who's reading?
You're the speaker.
Who's reading? Okay. Oh, boy. Thank you.
We just stand here and look.
Wait, I'm not a conformist.
Bear with me a minute, because I was just told that I'm reading, because I asked, except I forgot. Okay. A resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing and honoring Linda L. Barbara Wiltsey, P.E., for more than 32 years of excellent public service with the municipality of Anchorage. Whereas on June 28, 1984, Linda L. Barbara Wiltsey, P.E., began her employment as a civil engineer, 2, with the Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility, AWW, in the engineering design section. And whereas in September 1984, Linda Barbara Wiltsey, P.E., received the commendation letter from Mayor Tony Knowles for her outstanding efforts in assisting in the planning and design and then the actual construction of the necessary water and sewer lines for the Eagle Crest Water and Sewer Improvement District. And whereas Linda was promoted to engineering design supervisor on February 22, 1988, tasked with overseeing the design of all of AWW's capital improvement projects. She was changed to a project management supervisor in November 1992, overseeing both design and construction of capital projects. And whereas Linda has been recognized by the American Society of Civil Engineers for her contributions to the civil engineering profession on many occasions, including being named the Anchorage Civil Engineer of the Year 1992, the Alaska Civil Engineer of the Year 2006, and being awarded the Harold R. Payton Award for Cold Regions Engineering in 2010. And whereas Linda was recognized by her peers as a member of the AWW Work Unit of the Quarter in July 2002 and again in December 2009. And whereas Linda is a valuable long-term municipal employee with project experience and extensive knowledge of Anchorage's infrastructure. Her contributions have helped build and shape the municipality of Anchorage, including work on hundreds of projects with an estimated value of over $330 million. And whereas Linda will retire June 30 of 2016 after 32 years of service, now and therefore the Anchorage Assembly resolves that Linda L. Barbara Wiltsey, P.E., is recognized for her contributions to the Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility and for her dedication to the public health and safety of the residents of the municipality of Anchorage, passed and approved this 21st day of June 2016.
Do I get to say anything?
You certainly do.
All right. Well, if somebody would have asked me back in 1984 if I was going to make my service to the municipality of Anchorage ratepayers or the water and wastewater utility as my career, I would have probably not said yes, because I had no idea this is where it was going to go. But 8 mayors and 8 general managers later, I'm still here, and I look at the assembly, I look around the audience here, and many of you I've seen in the community councils where I've done work, and I had them do a map for me of the 250 plus projects, and I've touched a lot of Anchorage, most of Girdwood, and the northern communities. And some of the fun projects have been when I got got a bad image of the municipality early on, because 2 months after I started, I had a job under construction. And it's taken a lot longer since then to get projects under construction, but that was back in the day when we had some projects where areas had failing water systems and sewer systems, and the mayor was out there cutting the red tape, and we actually got some projects done, conceived and built in about the same calendar year. So it's been a great place. The municipality has been a great place for me to work, and the Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility is a world-class utility, and it'll only continue to get better, and it's been a great place to work, and I appreciate the recognition, and thank you all very much.
Thank you. We are now at Agenda Item 9A2, Resolution 2016-182. Mr. Evans?
Move to approve.
Ask unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, that resolution is approved.
And I think we'll have Assembly Member Emeritus Mr. Honeman present.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Spatafora. This is a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing and honoring Deputy Chief Ken Spatafora upon his retirement for his 38 years of service to the Anchorage Police Department and the citizens of Anchorage. Whereas Ken Spatafora was raised in Anchorage and spent much time with local media executive John Tracy, who remembers that Ken was never a slow person and has always done everything with speed and passion, including driving. And whereas, after being hired by the police department in March of 1978, Mr. Spatafora decided it would be better to give rather than receive speeding tickets, so he spent his first 6 years as a patrol officer, then as a uniformed investigator and a field training officer. And whereas Ken also had a secondary assignment as police instructor in defensive tactics, use of force, and apprehension techniques for 18 years. And whereas during those years he was transferred to the detectives section in property crimes and for 7 years was assigned to the homicide, robbery, and felony and assault units. And whereas Ken is a person who loves taking fishing trips across the inlet in his jet boat and was even happy when he caught nothing because speed took control, but during one incident, Ken and his companions were traveling in absolutely calm water, wide open space, in the dark, with their back to the bow, looking at a full moon and beautiful stars, when all of a sudden there was no moon and they were on top of the water in the middle of a sandbar. But with his leadership skills, they were able to row fast enough to beat the tide and successfully and safely reach home port. And whereas Ken also worked as a SWAT team member and became team leader of the highest level of defensive tactics after promotion to sergeant, continuing his time on the mid shift, also known as the 11 to 9 a.m. shift, when according to police officers, the really crazy stuff happens. And whereas, as a dedicated and loving dad, he spent his off-duty time taking his daughters fishing out of Seward in a 30-foot Tollycraft he bought for them. And whereas, during 1992 to 1995, he served his second tour as patrol sergeant and the following 3 years as detective sergeant in property crimes and the gang unit task force. And whereas his next 3 years of service were spent in major crimes unit, which dealt with death with homicides and sexual assaults, and during the years 2000 to 2008, he did his third tour as patrol sergeant. And whereas Patrol Sergeant Spatafora was promoted to lieutenant, which included command assignments in traffic, dispatch, data systems, and administration for the next 7 years. And whereas, when becoming a grandpa, he decided to build a cabin for his grandson in the same manner he had done for his daughters at Big Lake while they were growing up. And whereas, in July 2015, Ken Spatafora became acting captain of administration and in October was promoted to deputy chief. And whereas, after 38 years of service, Deputy Chief Ken Spatafora has decided to retire. Now, therefore, the Anchorage Assembly recognizes and honors Deputy Chief Ken Spatafora for his 38 years of service to the Anchorage Police Department and the citizens of Anchorage, passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 21st day of June, 2016.
You get to say a few words, if you'd like.
Well, it's been a privilege and an honor to serve the citizens of Anchorage all these years, and I'm real proud to have served with my brothers and sisters at the Anchorage Police Department, and I'm going to miss all of them. I'm going to miss being out there on the front lines with them and helping them, and I'm not going to miss passing the torch on to them to let them carry it for the next 38 years or whatever, but I do miss the people, and it's just been a great career. So thank you very much for the recognition.
Thank you. We all appreciate your service to the citizens of Anchorage. Next item on the agenda is item 9A3, AR 2016-183, celebrating the rich cultural heritage of the Polynesian Islands and recognizing the many contributions of Polynesian Americans to the security. As soon as I finish reading it. Thank you. And liberty of our nation. Mr. Flynn?
Move to approve. Second.
Ask unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, this resolution is approved. Are you here, Lucy?
Come on down.
Great.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. This is a resolution of the Municipal Assembly celebrating, as you mentioned, the cultural heritage of the Polynesian Islands and recognizing their contributions of Polynesian Americans to security and liberty of our nation. Whereas Polynesian Culture Flag Day was established as an annual event to honor the political relationship between American Samoa and the United States, and whereas Polynesian Culture Flag Day commemorates the raising of the American flag on Tutuila Island on April 17, 1900, and whereas Polynesian Culture Flag Day recognizes the service of Polynesian Americans who have fought and those who continue to fight for freedom in service to the United States, and whereas the Polynesian Association of Alaska's mission is to strengthen the Polynesian community and to share their collective culture and history through cultural pride and education, and whereas the Polynesian Association of Alaska collaboratively engages with individuals and organizations to build community, helps Alaska youth foster leadership skills, cultivates a thoughtful exchange of ideas, and promotes respect between elders and youth. And whereas the Polynesian Association of Alaska invites the Anchorage community to share in celebrating the rich cultural heritage of the Polynesian Islands, now therefore the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizes Polynesian Flag Day and encourages the Anchorage community to join in celebrating the rich cultural heritage of the Polynesian Islands and the many contributions of Polynesian Americans to the municipality of Anchorage, passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 21st day of June, 2016.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you all for always recognize this growing culture in our community in Anchorage. I want to invite everybody to recognize this special culture because it's very special to us. There are crickets going on right now, cricket game to celebrate a part of the Polynesian Flag Day. So I want to thank you all, and you are all welcome to attend. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now at agenda item 9D2, Assembly Memorandum 420, 2016, Excavating LLC for miscellaneous construction services term contract with Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility. Mr. Mbosky.
Move to approve. Actually, it's moved to accept, isn't it?
No, it's approved.
Okay, move to approve.
Second. Somebody?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Mbosky?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I actually asked this question, but I can't remember exactly if I really did or not, if I'm imagining it. So I'd like to ask somebody, I don't know if it's the administration or somebody from AWW, with respect to the contractor that actually hit the water main line, what is their liability? Are they going to pay us back for this?
The water main line at Old Seward and Tudor was punctured by a subcontractor working for GCI to build cables across Tudor Road. That would have been Fauna Corporation. We're moving ahead with addressing the fix and putting that into place. GCI held the permit for the crossing of the roadway, so they have the responsibility for the mishap. We put GCI on notice that we have to move ahead, and we expect to get reimbursement from GCI or those parties when the time comes.
Perfect. I appreciate that, Brett. I think it's prudent in this construction season. You know, it can be short, and since you're already doing work in the area, I think it's smart to go ahead and do it now. I just wanted to make sure, because they created the problem, that they have to pay for it.
Yeah, we recognize that. The DOT recognizing that Old Seward and Tudor is a major intersection, has asked that there be no closure of such a major intersection except during a long holiday weekend. So our choices are July 4th or Labor Day weekend, and it's to the city's advantage to make sure that we have that water line back in service as soon as possible. So we opted to move ahead under our own forces to make that happen.
I think it's a good
As it happens as well, I think GCI will be trenching across the road at the same time. Actually, we'll probably dig the trench for them, but they will be placing the optical cables across the road rather than try to rebore that same crossing of Tudor.
I appreciate it, and I think that was a good decision to just plug along. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Mr. Trainee has a question. Mr.
Sir, I
Trainee.
understand this is going to be done on July 4th weekend.
That's correct.
Just want to let the public know so they don't head down there and wonder what happened to the road.
We have a lot of public notification in the works, including radio, newspaper, social media, etc.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Sure thing.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Please vote. There's one person that didn't vote.
Better to check. Yeah.
Thought about that was approved unanimously. We are now at Agenda Item 9D3, Assembly Memorandum 421-2016, Alaska Municipal League for membership dues. Mr. Trainee.
Madam Chair, I don't intend to move this one forward. It's not the correct way to pay. This is annual dues we pay every year. Should not be done using this vehicle. So I don't intend to bring it forward, Madam Chair. You and I talked about it.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Would you mind postponing it indefinitely, making a motion to postpone it indefinitely?
Move to postpone this item indefinitely, item 9D3.
Thank you. Ask unanimous consent.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Dick, I didn't hear exactly what you just said here. What exactly is your concern with this?
These are annual dues we pay every year. So to list them down as a sole source, there is no other source for it. You just pay the dues every year, and this keeps our membership current and AML. And it doesn't ever come to us. We just, when we're doing the budget, we have the money in there for the annual dues that go to AML.
So how did this end up in here then?
It was a mistake.
It was just an administrative mistake, and I'm not going to identify who made it. It just happens. We move on.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Ask unanimous approval to postpone this indefinitely. And seeing no objection, this item is postponed indefinitely. We are now down to Agenda Item 9E6, AIM 77-2016 Municipal Marijuana License Status Report. Applications received through June 17, 2016. Mr. Trainee.
Move to accept, Madam Chair. I just want the body to know that we're actually going to start to have some marijuana license coming in front of us. So if you look on that document, I think our first one's coming in July 26th. So the publics want to know when's it finally going to hit here. That's when we'll start approving these. Mandy listed a bunch of them on there. Just want the body to know it. That's all, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Ask unanimous approval to accept this memorandum. Seeing no objection, this AIM is accepted. We are now down to Agenda Item 911A, AIM 59-2016 Annual Municipal Procurement Card Review. Mr. Starr.
Yeah, I'm going to move to postpone to July 12th.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Please vote to postpone this until July 2nd. 12th, I'm sorry. That item is postponed until the meeting of July 12th. Next item on the agenda is item 11B, AIM 70-2016, CFO recommendation for denial of tax incentives requested in the application for deteriorated area tax incentives on Peach Investments, LLC, and Peach Investment Corporation. What's the wish of the body? I don't see anyone in the queue. There's no motion on the floor to accept. Can I have a motion on the floor to accept?
Accept.
I need a second.
Second.
Thank you. Please vote Mr. Weddle, thank you. That item is accepted 10-1. Next item on the agenda we can't do until
Chair?
Mr. Flynn.
I believe Mr. Martinet is in the audience, and given that, if he's willing, I would move to waive the rules to take up item 12A at this time.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Any objection to waive the rules to take up item 12A? Seeing no objection, Mr. Martinet, please come to the podium. Welcome, sir. You have 3 minutes.
I know.
Great.
What I'm here about is that I received my green card this year, and it raised...
Could you bring the microphone a little closer to you?
Okay, is it like this? Is that better? I received my green card, and normally the value of my house went up. I couldn't figure out why it went up, because originally I did pull a permit to add a garage. Well, what happened somewhere last year, somebody must have came out and checked my house, saying that my garage, behind it where I left this as a normal garage, was living space. And I contacted them because how I found out that was I put my house in the market. It said it was 2510 when my house was originally 1970. So arguing with them that this is an error, they did come out and check and correct it. But my house should not be evaluated at a 2510 value or square footage. It's only 1970. It should go back to at least the year before. Nobody was really willing to answer me why they couldn't do it. So they said for me to come here and talk to you all to find out, can this be done or not? But it should be done because, like I say, my house has never changed. Somebody assumed that my house was bigger or that was living space. They never contacted me, they never sent me a letter, and they never called me. Of course, the one guy complained he doesn't have a phone list, but I'm in the internet. Anybody can look me up. They have my address. They could have sent me a letter, and I would have contacted them back. They did say that if they did, they had left a blue card, but I never saw a blue card. So when I finally found out this information, it was just a little bit too late for the thing, but still, it was not my error. This was done in their error, assuming that my house was done, because I never pulled a permit to add the living space. And that's my argument. It should be evaluated back to the old value. That's all I really have to say.
Thank you, sir. I don't see anyone in the queue, so thank you very much for speaking to us this evening.
Okay. Is there anything this council can do about this?
Ms. Domboski.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Abbott. Mr. Abbott, in the past, I've had constituents where property appraisal has recognized that there was a mistake on their tax assessment for multiple years. And property appraisal in this one case in Eagle River went back and actually refunded a few $1,000s. When I originally spoke to Mr. Martinet, I had indicated I didn't know what the parameters for having to appeal versus actually correcting a mistake were, and I have not yet gotten a clear answer. What is the ability of the municipality when they recognize that there's actually a mistake in something like this in fixing it without having to go through the appeal process?
So I think Mr. Harris can speak to this.
Thank you. Through the chair, Ms. Domboski. Hi, Paul. Typically what happens is that when we send out the green cards, the person who receives it has an appeal period, 30 days, to look at it and make sure there aren't any errors. Once that closes, then we simply keep rolling along, send them out the card again the next year. So they have an appeal period that's written into state law, and Mr. Falsey can hopefully jump in here if I've misstated any of this, but it's written into state law, and then we also have it as part of our municipal code, what those periods are for appealing an error that happens. Once it happens, once that period's closed out, then that's it. What I would encourage you to do is for the 2017 period, look out for the green card and for 16 if you haven't done it for this year. But
Well, I'm going to have to disagree with you because, like I say, it's not an error on my fault. Somebody assumed in your department or however they work it. Why do I have to pay for their error? To me, theft, either at a point of a gun or a point of a pin, is still theft.
Sir, thank you very much for your testimony, but this is not an avenue for debate, and I would highly recommend that you have a conversation with Mr. Harris.
This is all I'm trying to find out. To sit there and say nobody's at fault, I think is totally wrong. And I think it's wrong for this body to look at that and say, no, it's nobody's fault.
I understand, sir, but can I also, again, ask you if you would have a conversation with Mr. Harris offline? I really would appreciate that.
But like I say, I'm not going to let them say what they say, because I want to give my opinion at least about this. This is what this, I think, management's for.
And you did, and we appreciate your
Okay.
information.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Chair,
Mr.
I don't have a
Bosky?
question for him, but can
Thank
I
you.
just go back to Mr. Harris for just a
Certainly,
second?
Mr. Bosky.
So, Mr. Harris, I guess I didn't make myself clear. Like I said, I've had past experience where property appraisal has recognized they made a mistake outside of the appeal process, and they went back and retroactively looked for a series of years, and they ended up refunding someone in Eagle River a few $1,000s because they recognized it was their mistake. So
Thank you.
why would that happen in that case and not a case like this where somebody just changed the square footage of the house, but it really wasn't changed?
Thank you. Through the chair, Mr. Bosky, Bryant Robbins is here. I might ask him to approach and answer that question.
Madam Chair, I believe you're probably talking about an incident where there was a manifest clerical error, and in those situations, the governing body, the Assembly, is allowed to correct those at any time, according to the statute. But the definition of a manifest clerical error is very narrow, and this doesn't fall into the category of manifest clerical error. So it was probably brought to the Assembly for an action.
So actually, I don't think it was. Let me just chase this down a rabbit hole for just 1 second with the body's indulgence. So the specific issue that I referenced was someone who inadvertently their property tax exemption had been taken off of their property, and they didn't get their dump coupon. So they called me, landfill coupon. So they called me, and you know, as we started chasing it down, somebody in property appraisal realized, oops, we took that property exemption off. We actually owe them all this money.
Right.
So we were able, is that a manifest clerical error?
No.
That may have been a manifest clerical error. I would have to look at the specifics of that incident.
Because that's my point. It seems like we're treating two kind of similar situations where there was an accident or a mistake on the behalf of the municipality, and we fixed that one without Assembly action because I remember it. You guys just fixed it. It was awesome. It was great.
Okay.
In this particular situation where it seems, again, property appraisal, there was a little boo-boo, and there was an assumption that the square footage had changed when it hadn't. I don't understand the difference. If you could, we can talk offline, but if you could kind of reevaluate both of those situations, it would be gratefully appreciated.
And I've been, I'll just say for the record, I've been in discussion with legal about this, but we can talk offline.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Mr. Robbins. Mr. Traney.
Madam Chair, I would suggest Mr. Martinet contact the Ombudsman.
We're okay.
That's the right office to go to start this process. Give the Ombudsman a call, and I'll give you the number when we're done.
I contacted the office already. He's who manages that stuff, and that's who I was in argument with.
Yeah.
They just kept.
What did he say?
They didn't want to answer. Like I say, it was, to me, if I pulled a permit, fine, I could sit and say, okay, a little egg on my face because I didn't finish the job, but there's no permit pulled.
Sir, I want to say thank you very much. We're going to have this conversation offline, and we're going to go on a break in a minute.
I need to get my point out,
Right.
too, to what's going on.
We're going to have a break
okay?
in a minute, okay, and then we can have this conversation offline.
No
Thank you,
problem.
sir. Thank you, Mr. Robbins. Mr. Traney, anything else?
Madam Chair, let's take a break until 6 o'clock, and we'll begin regular business.
Is that a motion to take recess?
Yes, it is.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. We are on recess for 20 minutes. Granting a public hearing regarding the conditional protest of the renewal of liquor license 1078 for Fantasies on 5th LLC. Public hearing
Madam
is...
Chair,
Mr. Traney?
we have a request to move the public hearing to the 23rd of August.
Thank you, Mr. Traney. I still need to open the public
I know.
hearing.
Just
Okay,
want to
thank
let
you.
you know and the people know.
Thank you, Mr. Traney. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard?
So this is in regards to a nightclub?
It's Fantasies is the club
Okay.
across from Merrill Field.
Well, I just wanted to take the opportunity before it got too late and the public testimony was cut off. I mean, if we don't wind up having time, to just use this opportunity to let the public who may be watching on television
and all of you Assembly members that we have a petition that has been approved by the municipal attorney.
Excuse me, sir, does this have anything to do with the item that is open for public hearing right now, also known as Fantasies LLC?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, please continue.
In Fantasies on Fifth, they are being dosed with neurotoxin, which is fluoride. It's a classified neurotoxin, and we have a petition that would affect Fantasies on Fifth and all municipal buildings with a municipal water supply to the effect of removing it. Now this language, as I indicated before, has been brought to the municipal attorney. He has approved it with advice from the Alaska Supreme Court and cases relating to it and such. So what I'm basically doing is presenting this to the public that we are calling ourselves the Clean Water Team.
Excuse me, sir, I really need to interrupt you because this public hearing is regarding the conditional protest of the renewal of liquor license 1078 for Fantasies. And what you're talking about is a different subject matter? If you want to continue this conversation at the end of the agenda, we'll be more than happy
Ma'am,
to
I
hear from you.
had 24 seconds left to talk on how the public water, which is being administered to Fantasies on Fifth, is a toxic fluoride,
I
ma'am.
appreciate your testimony, but your subject matter is not on this particular agenda item, and you're more than welcome to stay because you'll be able to talk. I forgot what item number it is, but you'll be able to talk at the end of the meeting about item 17. Thank you, Mr. Trainee, about anything you want. Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to be heard on this item? Welcome. Please state your name, spell your last, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Yana Tatarinova, Y-A-N-A, and the last name is T-A-T-A-R-I-N-O-V-A. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today and tell my story. I've been working at Fantasies on Fifth for almost 10 years, and I'm the voice for so many girls that were either afraid or not aware of the laws that they could pursue to protect themselves. Fantasies on Fifth did not pay my wages, no other girls, for the last 2 years of my employment and also required us to give kickbacks to them every night they worked. Fantasies have been sued before in the United District Court of Alaska. It was a 4-day bench on January 2012 for the same reasons, and they lost. The plaintiffs were awarded damages and additional liquidated damages. Fantasies count on the fact that they can bully, threaten, and break the law with no repercussions. I have already told you that they were sued over the same labor laws not so long ago, and they lost. Why they have not changed the way they do business, we don't know. When they were in trouble for so many calls to the police, we were instructed that we were never to call the police or emergency services. We were told that under no circumstances we were to dial 911 because it would result in the loss of their liquor license. Fantasies also decided to break the ABC rules by falsely filing out the application regarding financial interest by putting a figurehead in charge so that if sued, there would be nobody to hold accountable. In the last 2 years I worked there, I can say that the current licensee been there maybe 3 times. He was not allowed on the premises, because of all the problems that he was causing when he was drinking. I'm asking you not to renew their liquor license and hold them accountable for myself and all my coworkers. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing none. Mr. Trainee.
Move to continue the hearing on this item until 23rd of August, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We need to vote on that.
23rd of August, that was the request.
Please vote to continue the public hearing to the meeting of August 23rd. Mr. Steele, Mr. Starr, thank you. That item will be continued to the August 23rd meeting. We're now at agenda item number 13B, Anchorage Ordinance 2015-142, provisions regarding telecommunications facilities, including cell towers. We also have a substitute version, S1, that was posted online, I think, for the last 2 weeks, and there are copies over there if anybody has not seen a copy. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Assembly. My name is Bruce Schulte. I'm here tonight representing the Southport Master Association.
Can you spell your last name, please?
I'm sorry, Schulte, S-C-H-U-L-T-E.
Thank you.
We recognize that, cell towers are, part of the community, part of the infrastructure. They're not going away. 2 years ago, Southport had a bit of a row with a telecommunications company that was trying to jam a fairly large tower into our community without, we feel, due process. My point being here tonight is simply to ask that the Assembly give due consideration to planned communities like Southport and others, and the underlying CC&Rs that were designed to protect the aesthetic of those communities. I believe that there may be an ordinance, an amendment tonight to give a little bit more deference to those types of communities. And I would urge the body to consider those. We understand that these cell towers are a fact of life, in modern society, but certain communities have gone to great lengths to maintain a certain aesthetic, and we would like the Assembly to help us maintain that.
Thank you, sir. There are no questions. Thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome. Please state your name and spell your last.
My name is Ron Stillens. Want me to spell it?
Please.
S-T-I-L-L-E-N-S.
Thank you.
I live in Southport, and I think I got more questions than the papers have, and most of them are technical. Who do I ask?
Sir, the venue this evening is for public testimony, not to ask questions. Is what you want to do is ask questions only, or do you want to testify on the ordinance that's before us?
I would like to have no towers in Southport.
Okay.
And the reason is they are a private area, not public. And with that, if you put public things in it, you have to have approval. Who's giving approval? That's one of several questions I have besides the technical
Okay,
ones.
sir, what I'm going to recommend is that offline, that you have a conversation with this woman right here. Her name is Erica McConnell, and I'm sure she'll be able to answer your questions.
Goody. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome. Please state your name and spell your last.
Good evening. My name is Marilyn Pelafont. I'm here as the Rogers Park Community Council President, newly elected, and I'm talking about the S1 version of this ordinance, 142. First of all, I would like to say that our Community Council has been working very diligently since last September, trying to stay abreast of the issue and all the different amendments that are coming forward. In this summer, since community councils are on recess, but we're trying to stay abreast of this. So I do thank you for your patience, and I also want to thank you for working with the community councils. Ms. Gray Jackson and Mr. Cheney is our Rogers Park Community Council representatives, and they have been there consistently listening to our community members and their concerns. So I want to say thank you for that. And Rogers Park Community Council has also passed several resolutions relating to this ordinance. And so we've been kind of working together, which is really a nice thing to see. And we're happy to see the maintenance of the 200-foot separation distance on T4 cell towers in residential areas. I think that's really important for safety issues, for no other reason but safety. Let's see, the other, we do still have some concerns relating to stealth or camouflage of monopines. I will use that word that has been used in the past. to the casual observer, which is language in the ordinance, whatever camouflage is used on the monopine that is going to go in on the 27th Avenue and Latouche at the Baptist Church parking lot really does need to blend in. It can't just be a painted pole. That is just really, in my envisioning, in my brain, is going to be very inappropriate. And now that it has been moved, I'm getting phone calls from neighbors in that neighborhood and who are very concerned about their view shed. So monopine are not the way of the future, I hope. Small cell technology is still something we are very concerned about moving forward and pursuing. So I hope that this assembly is also looking more technologically to the future and not relying on what is the easiest and best for industry, most convenient for industry. We really do need to have what's friendly to neighborhood and our community at large. So I guess that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Here, you're welcome. Anyone else wish to be heard?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome, sir.
My name is Mark Modrow. I'm senior counsel at GCI. Many of you have worked with my colleague, Becky Wint Pearson. Unfortunately, or fortunately, she had a healthy baby boy 3 weeks early last week. So I'm standing in for her. GCI supports the S1 version of the ordinance as a workable compromise. It's subject to industry concerns that have been expressed over the entire process on the technology area. The S1 version, in our opinion, represents work by staff, the administration, the industry, the community councils, and the myriad of public forums, as well as the assembly taking an interest in the area. And we feel that the current amendments that are embodied in S1 are reasonable compromises. We especially appreciate at GCI the discussion regarding the co-location, the public policy of encouraging co-location. Without that amendment, you are virtually guaranteeing the single carrier 65-foot proliferation of towers in residential areas. There's simply no way around it at that mandated height. We would especially encourage your attention to making it available to other carriers. It's been said, well, you're in competition. Yes, we are in competition, but we're businesses, and that co-location is something we look to first. It's very much of a cost and a planning tool. Again, I'm standing in for Ms. Pearson, who could answer detailed questions. I'll be followed by my colleagues from AT&T, who are much more versed in any details. But GCI supports the current S1 version as a reasonable compromise, and we look forward to working with the administration in the future.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
there are
you.
no questions. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome. Please state your name and spell your last.
Madam Chair, Peter Ryan, R-Y-A-N. I'm a Southport resident as well. I just was informed about the meeting and new regulations last night. Unfortunately, I have not had time to review those at this time. I want to refer to what Mr. Schulte said about the row in South Park when they tried to put a cell tower right in back of my house about 2 years ago. Aside from the aesthetic, Southport is a beautiful planned community, and I don't want to see it ruined with monopines or any other kind of towers, destroying the beauty of Alaska. The whole EMF issue is another thing that we don't have time to go into here, of course, but this unchecked proliferation of cell towers, I'm just really concerned about this, and I hope we move forward very cautiously. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir. There are no questions. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome. Please state your name, spell your last.
Howard Levine, Levine.
Just give it to us. We'll pass it out. Thank you.
Thank you. I've been involved in the Citizens Working Group for not quite a year now on this amended ordinance regarding telecommunication facilities, and I want to thank this body, the Planning and Zoning, the staff, the community, and the providers for working diligently to arrive at the current S version. I support the S version with 2 minor friendly amendments. Friendly amendment first is on page 11. It's Assemblyman Dunbar's amendment. I'd suggest that we change the language that's currently written to the sentence on line 40, 41, and 42 in section 7D, i, co-location, to read, with a signed agreement to co-locate document demonstrating that another carrier will co-locate on the tower, which can be subject to the tower's final approval. I'd also like to make a friendly amendment to Mr. Peterson's amendment on page 16, lines 21 through 27, section 8D, ii, concealment qualification for towers and antennas. I'd like to change that sentence slightly to read, by itself, comma, paint schemes on antenna only, comma, large, paren, macro, close paren, are not presumptively sufficient to classify this type 4 facility, comma, but the director may determine that a paint scheme is sufficient to achieve the concealment requirement to be classified as a type 4 facility, period.
Sir, are you operating off the S or the S1 version?
S1.
Thank you, Mr. Croft.
I did too, but it
Please
seemed like
continue.
it was S1.
Both of these minor tweaks, I think, clarify what the intent of the original amendments were. Being at the work session a couple weeks ago, I believe this is a solution to what might have been an inconsistency. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, so I didn't catch all that. You think those are encapsulated into amendments that, who has?
Assemblyman Dunbar made an amendment on page 11, lines 40, 41, 42, section 7D, i, co-location.
And that already got incorporated into the S1 version?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
And Assemblyman Peterson made an amendment that was incorporated on page 16, lines 21 through 27, concealment qualifications for towers and antennas.
Okay, so you're not asking for any more. You just like those?
No, sir. I'm asking that the words be modified to those that I handed out in red.
I haven't got them yet, but they're coming. Thanks.
Anything else, Mr. Croft?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, sir?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all?
Right.
Welcome, sir. Please state your name and spell your last.
Sure. My name is Wayne Pichon. My last name is spelled P as in Paul, I-C-H-O-N. And for the last almost 20 years, I have served as the secretary of the Bayshore Clap Community Council, and I am testifying tonight for the executive board of that group. This, candidly, is kind of new news to us. We were not aware that there was a working group, or, maybe we're just naive or something. But I
Sir,
have to
can you
admit
speak into
to
the
you...
microphone, please?
Pardon me?
Would you speak into the microphone, please? Thank you, sir.
I thought I had a loud enough voice.
No.
Anyway, I wanted to share with you that, in the 20 years that I've been associated with our council, there have been 3 things that have filled our council chambers, as it were. Number 1 was the Coastal Trail. Number 2 was the effort on the part of some to place a private prison. in our backyards, and number 3 was this. This being the idea of putting a 95-foot tower next to our Fire Station 15. Sadly, we as council members witnessed the prevarication of data to justify the siting of the tower. Firemen who were told, don't you dare talk to those council members or it'll cost you your jobs. Keep your mouths shut concerning that tower, even though obviously these men who put their lives on the line, and women, were concerned about their own safety. And neighborhood residents who were stonewalled when they had concerns. You know, we as a group had today to look at this. It was given to us last night. And the officers got together today, and I can tell you that universally we are opposed to this. We would really hope that there would have been more stringent guidelines that are maybe a little more contemporary, other than merely a proliferation of steel monuments. You know, we were right in a firing line with this. We got to live it. We got to see it. And candidly, it was not pretty. And to see just what in essence is an opening of the door really gives us a lot of concern. And, you know, I would hope that it would give all of you some concern too. I don't know who all you represent. I just know that the folks that myself and some others who for 20 years have sat in those meetings, they're not happy with this. They're not happy with it at all. Okay. So thank you for letting me share our story.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome.
Thank you.
Please state your name, spell your last.
Kate Petoskey, P-E-T-O-S-K-E-Y. I'm testifying this evening as president of the Discovery Park Homeowners Association, 207 units in the Discovery Park subdivision, which is located in Southport Planned Community. We have submitted a resolution opposing the ordinance to Bayshore Clack Community Council for several reasons. It is frankly out of place within our residential setting and was never really intended to be part of the Southport master community. As Mr. Pashon just mentioned, we were denied our public process a few years ago, as he mentioned. And so we are in opposition to the ordinance as written. We are adjacent to the Fire Station 15 and also Southport Park. With a couple changes to zoning, we might be able to feel better about it. And those changes would be to the Fire Station 15 property to correct that zoning so that it reflects the existing use. And the other one would be to the park designation, the park zoning, so that those uses would not be more intensive than those within a certain distance. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome.
Hi. My name is Margaret Louie, and I represent Discovery Heights. I'm on the Discovery Heights board. We have 81 homeowners. We have a lot of concerns about this ordinance. We asked, or Carr Gutstein asked Mr. Weddleton to submit an amendment Has that been done?
Excuse me, Mr. Weddleton, did you have a comment?
Should I answer that question, or we're? I'm happy, I will go through 4 amendments. Some of them do address concerns that you've told me before.
So they will be presented to the Assembly?
I believe you got copies of essentially what I intend to amend.
Okay.
Via email.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Please continue.
Okay. We, all of us purchased in Discovery Heights because it was a planned community with very strict height restrictions and covenants. There was a deal that was made between the City of Anchorage and Carr-Gottstein back in 1995 about developing that marshland. And it involved X density for X amount of open space, parks, and common areas. Now, that is being changed when a telecommunications company can come in and basically build a tower just about anywhere. And it looks to us like they can submit an application without much fuss. I would just like to ask if anyone has seen the pictures from the 1870s when folks had just discovered that oil had some useful purposes. There were oil rigs 20 feet apart, miles of them. This is what we run the risk of, is having cell towers take over our horizon. So we have to be careful with what we're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for being
And thank you, Assembly members. I know it's a thankless job.
You're welcome. Anyone else wish to be heard? Hello, sir. Welcome.
My name is James Gill, and although I live in the Southport area and in Discovery Park, I am making these comments on behalf of myself. So thank you, members of the Assembly, for this opportunity. I want to address specifically an issue that comes up, page 10, 7B, which states that the minimum distance from protected land uses, the minimum separation distance between the base of the tower and any principal structure on residentially zoned land or any school or child care center should be 200% of the allowable or actual tower height, whichever is greater, which seems to suggest that the distance is either going to be from a residential structure or from any school or child care center 130 feet or 180 feet. There is very little research in the United States on the subject of health effects of these towers, but there's considerable in the international realm. The beginning of this document says that the regulations contained herein are designed to protect and promote public health, safety, community welfare, and so on. I don't find anywhere where public health is addressed, and I don't find anywhere where there's a rationale for setting these distances. If you go with the international research, the distances would be vastly greater than what is suggested here, beginning at 100 meters, 330 feet, and beyond. And I think some rationale for setting these very close distances. Health effects are described in the international research to include many, many things, including several forms of cancer. And I think that rationale has to be brought forward if this is going to have a basis that it promotes public health. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There are no questions. Anyone else wish to be heard? Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Chair Gray Jackson, Assembly members. My name is Sean Ushman. I'm the External Affairs Director for AT&T. The last name is USCHMANN. At AT&T, we'd like to thank the Assembly, the Planning Zoning Commission, and staff, especially Erica McConnell and Dennis Wheeler, for the work that they've put in over the past months developing this cell tower ordinance. We appreciate the thoughtful approach that's been taken in developing this ordinance, incorporating both the input from your constituents, industry, as well as the community council. Is it a perfect ordinance from an industry perspective? No, but we believe on balance it's addressed the issues and concerns brought up. Our goal at AT&T is to provide high quality service to our customers here in Anchorage, and we believe that under this ordinance we're going to be able to do that. We're going to be able to meet the current needs as well as address the technology changes that are coming down the road. There's always a constant need for more and more data from our customers, and we believe that as written, this S1 ordinance is going to allow us to go ahead and do that. We respectfully request that the Assembly approve this ordinance as written. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There are no questions. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing? Hello. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Heather Nolan. Last name is Knowlan. I'm sure several of you, my face is very familiar about the cell tower issues. I've been involved since there was a cell tower that was going to go into the South Addition. And July 1st, it'll be officially 2 years that I've been studying up on cell towers. And it's not my industry. I'd like to say that I appreciate Erica. I think she's done a really great job bridging the gap between residents and industry and terminology. I would like to say I would have liked to see more protections for residents that live here, want to stay here, invest in the community. I did want to point out that industry's happy with this ordinance, I think, because there are still major gaps in the criteria and the permitting process, which I think will lead to a lot of appeals and issues going back to planning and zoning and probably ending up here and not the long or far distance from where we are today. So when we originally started talking about these work plans with Mr. Peterson and Ms. Zimboski and a few of us, the idea was to create this good criteria for permitting so that way the residents knew what to expect, industry knew what to expect, and that it would really clearly define some of those requirements. And industry pretty much didn't add any value as far as any ideas of what they would be willing to do and what they wouldn't be willing to do, other than they're pretty clear that they're not really interested in investing in new technology. They want to keep the regulation to old technology. And that was pretty much all I wanted to say. Thank you all for your time. I hope you don't pass it.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome. Please state your name and spell your last.
Good evening, Chair Gary Jackson and the Assembly members. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. My name is Ken Lyons with the Bush Law Firm on behalf of AT&T. I also want to echo the thought that there's just been a tremendous amount of effort and work that's gone into this, and I want to thank each and every one of you for your thoughtful consideration of this. Definitely want to thank the entire Assembly, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and of course the entire municipal staff. I know that the ordinance, in terms of the way it was written, is just a lot cleaner in terms of being able to understand it, and there's a lot of improvements that have been made in that regard. And we do support the adoption of the S1 version and incorporating all the amendments that have been made. It's very important to note that we do not like a number of provisions that are in this code, and we believe that there are a number of provisions that are unduly burdensome. And I know that we've mentioned these before, certainly things like the amount of height in order to make sure that there's co-location opportunity, the separation standard of 200%, the extension of residential standards into non-residential zones, certainly the preference for alternative technologies, and then the notification of activation, the annual inventory requirements. So there's a lot of issues that we are concerned with that we believe make it unduly burdensome to be able to provide service that people are depending on. And more depending on it in a tremendous way. Many people don't have home phone service at all anymore, and they're depending on wireless only, and it's important that we're able to provide quality wireless service to customers. It's important to the economy. It's important to people's lives. So while we have a number of concerns with it, we appreciate the comments and all of the Assembly has considered from all of the stakeholders, and we appreciate the balance that the Assembly has tried to strike. And at this point, I think we are more concerned about the potential of changes that would undermine that balance. Really, some of the amendments even that were offered up tonight, I don't know if that really reflects the balance that, there was a comment that this was just clarifications to better reflect the intent. I believe that those amendments that I was written are already very clear and appropriate. And so again, we would support not making any more changes to the S1 draft. So accordingly, we are prepared to move forward, and we would urge the Assembly to move forward with the S1 draft without any changes. And we appreciate your time. I'm certainly available to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none. Public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Madam Chair, I move the S1 version.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Mr. Weddleton?
Second.
Right. You have several amendments?
Right. I have several amendments, and they've been handed out. They are amendments X1 through 4. The page numbers on these, I'm sorry, apply to...
Turn your mic on, please, sir.
You just need to talk into it. The page numbers refer to the S version, but they're not too far off. The first one simply refers, our city charter requires that any lease in a park go to a vote of the people. And in this ordinance, we allow towers by conditional use or permitted if it's a stealth tower. So this just kind of flags the fact that a vote of the people may be necessary if a tower is put in a park. So you have it in front of you. We just add some verbiage to 21.05040 K3. Towers in dedicated parks may require a majority vote at a regular or special election as provided for in the Anchorage Home Rule Charter 10.02.8 if siting the tower would require the municipality to convey an interest in lands. And I did run this by the municipal attorney. I think he's somewhat comfortable with it. He could speak to that.
Through the chair, that is correct. Typically, it's not our preference to include these explanatory cross-references, but we think this one accurately captures the requirements of the charter, and so we don't have any hard substantive objection.
Mr. Weddleton, we need a second on your motion, please. Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Please continue, Mr. Weddleton.
Do you want me to go through each of them, or do you want...
No. Are you done?
I'm done on that.
Thank you. Mr. Starr.
Through the chair, Mr. Falsey, the notion of sort of right-of-way and already previously dedicated lands that we have bisecting our parks, are you in the opinion that if, in fact, a cell tower provider chose a location such as that, or already a previously co-located one, that would have to go to a vote of the people?
Through the chair, not in all cases. This ends up being a somewhat complicated question under the municipal charter. We have to have a vote of the people to convey an interest in lands in a dedicated park. An interest in land is a defined term in the charter, and an interest in lands which has no value to the municipality can be approved without a vote. So it really depends on whether the terms of, say, the lease or tower siting agreement were revocable, whether it's for a significant duration, whether it's for a significant monetary amount. So it's sort of a case-by-case inquiry. I think this amendment, as proposed by Assemblymember Weddleton, accurately captures the state of play in that it name-checks the interest in land criterion. But it's not an easy question to answer at that level of generality.
And the key word being conveyed, so the definition of what we give away is probably going to be questionable at the at the actual request for use of municipal lands. I mean, we do it all the time, I guess is where I'm getting at. We do it in corners of fire stations, and we do it in corners of, this is specific to parks, but the conveyance term of lands, given to others in a long-term lease doesn't mean we give it away forever. Is that where the...
And through the chair, this is a rule that is specific to dedicated park land. So dedicated parks are given different special treatment under the charter that would not be the case at a facility which is a fire facility or a police facility.
And it's strictly... Here's where I go with it, is we have the Warren system. If we were just talking about cell towers themselves, it'd be fine, but we have other towers. So when we have public utility facilities for, say, the firemen or a forwarding location of the Warren radio system that's the safety net for all of us to use, is that going to be in there? Is there anything that really speaks to the public use antenna and array system that you may have in other situations?
Through the chair, I'm not certain I completely track that question, but I don't know that the Warren system is the Warren system related to a cell tower. Is that? I guess I'm not familiar with that. Right. So I don't know that that would even be covered by that. But I guess I'll say, as I'm extemporizing in response to the question about the Warren system, maybe I'd want to confer with Erica and others.
I mean, it's you have it under the banner a little bit of telecommunications facilities, and those are broad-reaching. So I'm a little bit cautious that we're going to exclude that park because somebody's going to use this clause later to say they don't want that. In the Midwest, with tornado warning devices and other things, public facilities are best to put public utilities. So that's okay. I appreciate the intent. Again, when we face the application on a municipal park, hopefully your concern becomes valid. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Ms. Domboski.
Thank you. Mr. Starr was kind of going in the direction I was going to go in, sort of. So, Mr. Falsey, if I understand this, on a case-by-case basis, I actually focused on the word may in here instead of convey, because on a case-by-case basis, the interest being conveyed may not be substantial in your view. So if somebody, for example, does a 5-year lease, would you consider that to be substantial, or are you talking a 25-year lease is substantial?
So through the chair, I think the Assembly has partially answered this question by code, and if you give me a moment, I may be able to fish that out. I will say the story begins with Section 1002 of the Charter, which reads as follows. In addition to any other actions which require an ordinance, the Assembly shall use ordinances to 8. Convey or lease or authorize the conveyance or lease of any interest of lands of the municipality. An ordinance conveying an interest in real property dedicated to public park or recreational purposes is valid only upon approval by a majority of those voting on the question at a regular or special election. But the term an interest in lands is a defined term in the Charter, and in Section 1713, subsection E, interest in lands means any estate in real property or improvements thereon, excluding revocable permits or licenses, rights-of-way, or easements which the Assembly finds to be without substantial value to the Assembly. It would take me a minute to fish it out, but the Assembly has opined on what permits are not of substantial value to the Assembly, so I would say we would lens that question, a particular cell tower lease, through those criterion.
Okay, I'll let you kind of fish that out a little. My other question for the administration, do we currently have, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but do we currently have cell towers in parks? Is there any park that has a cell tower?
Through the chair, Ms. Domboski, we have a what is called a cow tower, a cell on wheels, which is a temporary tower in Kincaid. And I believe, and I don't know if there's someone, maybe Ms. Ward from real estate would prefer to speak on how that was approved.
Well, and there's a live proposal, Madam Chair, to make that permanent. I mean, I've been to community council meetings where it's been discussed that Kincaid cell tower that is now movable is proposed to be made permanent.
Thank you, Mr. Croft.
So,
Madam Chair, if I may, I believe that will be through a 1-year revocable lease that will be that could be revoked at any time, but that could also be extended each year.
Okay, so then maybe Mr. Falsey can weigh in. If that was a one-year revocable lease, would that qualify for having to be voted on, or?
And through the chair, no, the Assembly has brought the charter provision into operation through AMC 253020. C reads, revocable permits or licenses, right-of-way agreements, or easements are deemed to be without substantial value to the municipality if the agreement meets the following conditions. 1, the stated value to the municipality for the term of the agreement is $50,000 or less. 2, the term of the agreement is for 1 year or less. And 3, if the structure or improvement is authorized, it must be removable within 30 days of the termination of the agreement. My understanding of the pending process is that someone has proposed, that a company has proposed a tower that would have a renewable annual lease where we would incorporate those provisions into the lease.
Thank you. That answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Mr. Weddleton?
Well, thank you. Can I address some of the points that were made? One thing for Mr. Starr, a tower or some facility that the municipality puts in a park is okay. That the charter does not preclude that because the municipality is not giving up an interest. So if it's a tower for fire or something, that would not be covered by this. We should note that we're talking about leases of space for a tower, and a lease is specifically mentioned in the charter language. A long-term lease, if you take a tower which costs well over $100,000 to install, and you say, well, let's make it 1 year revocable lease, that's not really real. That's a ruse to me. If you're leasing for a large tower, that's a lease in a parkland, and it should be covered by this vote. The dollar amount of interest, I understand, is about $50,000, and a lease would be, for these things, is typically about $10,000 a year. So if you do a 5-year lease, that's about $50,000. That's a significant interest. So what this really does is just flags the industry that our charter, I feel, certainly requires a vote in these cases, but we've put may because the attorney feels somewhat uncertain on that, and I believe we'll clarify that in the future. So this is really just intended here to flag to the industry that the P in park in the chart, permitted use of a type 4 tower, stealth tower, is not as easy as it looks. I mean, permitted looks like you go down, you file your form, and you get it. That's not true. It's going to be very difficult to put these in a park. So this just flags it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree that this language really has no significance other than flagging the fact that a law already exists. I don't think it changes anything as to whether or not it's an interest in land being conveyed. That'll have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis when it occurs. So basically, I don't think this language does anything substantively. I'm fine with doing nothing. I can support it. Actually, I'm pretty good at it, so I'm on board.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. There's no one else in the queue. Please vote on Mr. Weddleton's amendment, numbered X1. I'm going for it. That amendment was approved 10-1. Mr. Weddleton.
Okay, I'd like to move Amendment X2 in front of you. Nothing in the current ordinance, S1, refers to planned communities or planned community developments under current code. So this just kind of calls them out and states how those would be handled. So it adds to Section 21.05040.K.3a statement, towers in PC districts, and I might amend that to say PCD districts to reflect current code. PC and PCD districts shall be allowed in accordance with the provisions of the district's master plan. So we have lots of planned communities in Anchorage. Some are industrial, some are residential, and this just says that the rules that those master plans show are the ones that would prevail.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Just for clarity, your proposed amendment is towers in PCD, correct?
I think I'd need to say PC and PCD, or just PCD?
PCD. Thank you. There's no one in the queue. Please vote. Ms. Dombrowski? For Mr. Dunbar. Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. Ms. Dombrowski.
Thank you. So one of my questions when we're talking about planned communities, as one of the speakers eloquently described the planned community she was in, she referred to it being planned in 1995. And I don't know that anybody really contemplated the need or the proliferation of technology, thereby the need for cell towers. So to me, I think this is kind of going in a direction where we're basically adopting potentially a plan that's 20 years old that doesn't contemplate cell towers in order to make sure there's no cell towers in that neighborhood. And I don't know that that's the right direction. So any thoughts on that, Mr. Weddleton?
Well, that has been brought up. Most of these are fairly old. My neighborhood is, most are residential, some are commercial. The Ship Creek Plan Community does mention towers, and it says that they would allow, I believe, one tower. So it is addressed in some. Mostly at this, they'll be residential, and they'll go under the residential rules unless it says no towers. That's my understanding. Can we refer that to Ms. McConnell?
Certainly.
That'd be fair.
Through the chair, Ms. Domboski, the Southport master plan identifies a number of different development areas, and for each of those development areas, it does set some criteria for density and housing style, but then it also refers to one of the established zoning districts for allowed uses and other development requirements. So you'll have some of the development areas that will refer you to the R1 provisions. You'll have some of the development areas that will refer you to the R3 provisions. So they really end up getting treated like other zoning districts around the community.
Okay, that sort of helps me. Erica, I'm trying to understand what the impact of this would be rather than just going with a code that's been developed, being the S1 version. I'm trying to understand if we're not making a big mistake, because I don't know what every single one of these plans look like. And so now I'm being asked to just go by the plans when some of them may not even contemplate cell towers.
In my opinion, this amendment is very similar to the last amendment in that it's basically stating a situation that would occur anyway because the PCD districts are governed by their master plans, which are all approved by the Assembly. And I'm actually only aware of 3 within the community, the Southport, the Ship Creek one, and then the Powder Reserve.
Okay, so you're not thinking this is basically not really going to affect anything. You're still going to process them the same way that you normally do, which would be looking at the plan and considering everything.
And I believe this is a clarification. Yeah.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Domboski. Mr. Starr.
Erica, correct me if I'm not interpreting this correctly, but in our region, meaning Chugach Eagle River, don't we have a fair number of lands that are placarded PC that don't have a supporting master plan yet?
Through the chair, Mr. Starr, I don't entirely remember, but no development can happen on in PC zoning except for large lot single family without a master plan. So if there are large vacant areas that are zoned PC, they will need to basically come to the Assembly with a master plan before they can develop, and then
Well, we've seen a proliferation of cell towers up and down the Glen. So in the development reserve status, I ask you the same question, then this amendment really won't carry any weight into those decisions. We're back to the administrative site plan review and some of the other
Correct. This would not affect the development reserve.
Okay. And then I guess, Mr. Falsey, where these master plans are silent on cell towers or telecommunication interests, and I think Ms. Domboski is correct in that some of them don't speak directly to that. If the master plan is silent on that, then are we going to generate bureaucracy and a master plan review and redraft and all the costs associated with going back and revisiting a master plan to update it when it comes to telecommunications? Would that be the practice that will happen?
Through the chair, I think I would actually defer to Ms. McConnell on what would be practically triggered if a cell tower were proposed to be sited in a planned community.
Through the chair, Mr. Starr, again, I believe there are only 3. The Southport one refers to existing zoning regulations. I believe somebody stated that the Ship Creek master plan addresses cell towers in some way, and I haven't looked at the Powder Reserve one recently, but I believe that was a recent enough master plan that I expect it either addresses cell towers or does a similar thing where it just refers to existing zoning, but I would have to...
I chuckle because right to the north of Powder Reserve now are two co-located, one blinking all the time, which is challenging, but okay, well, you got me thinking about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. There's no one else in the queue. Please vote on Mr. Weddleton's Amendment X2. That amendment was approved unanimously. Mr. Weddleton.
I'd like to move Amendment X3.
Second.
Thank you. X3 simply increases the notification requirement where to say that if you want to put a cell tower there, you put up one of those public notice signs instead of just do a mailing. It seems very simple. If you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars putting up a tower, you can go out and put a sign up and warn the neighborhood. And we heard in testimony here frustration with the process for these towers. And this, I don't like those signs. I think they're ineffective, but we do what we can with them, and this increases it slightly. So, again, just a slight enhancement to help the community.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. There's no one in the queue. Please vote. That amendment was approved unanimously. Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you. I'd like to move Amendment X4. Thank you. Amendment X4 simply requires the same landscaping for towers in parks that is required for residential. This seems fairly straightforward. I mean, we have lots of parks. Parks are a real asset in Anchorage. And it just requires that we have, we don't have barbed wire, we don't have, unsightly fences, plastic, vinyl, and so on, and that we plant some trees around the base of these towers. So it just extends the residential requirements onto parks.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Croft.
Yeah, Madam Chair, this is an amendment that I had originally asked about, and then Mr. Weddleton ran with, and I appreciate him doing that, but I'd ask your and the body's permission to be shown as a co-sponsor of the amendment.
What do we need to do?
We vote on that? That's fine with me. Thank you. I'm not embarrassed at plagiarizing good ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Croft, that's fine.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There is no one else in the queue. Please vote. That was approved unanimously. Mr. Weddleton.
That's actually all I have today. Thank you, everyone, for indulging me.
You sure?
That's it. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Are there any other amendments to the S1 ordinance? Seeing no other. Mr. Croft.
One of our public testifiers mentioned two specific amendments.
Well, what is this all about? It's the same thing as this.
And those have been distributed. I'll move them at least for discussion purposes so we can understand their impact. So they've been distributed, yeah, with a Mr. Howard Levine on the top, subject AO number, well, he says 2015, but the S1. And so I'd move the amendment that starts page 11, lines 40, 41, and 42. It begins with a signed agreement to co-locate.
I'll second for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Ms. Dombrowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Erica, I'm going to start with a comment, and then I'll have you just comment on my comment if I'm off track. One of the things that I am a little leery of approving, I'm not supportive of this amendment as of yet, and the reason is I'm a little concerned because it says with a signed agreement to co-locate the document, demonstrating that another carrier will co-locate on the tower. And my understanding from all the work sessions and discussions, when someone builds it, they don't necessarily know if they're going to have somebody else co-located on it. So I think that might pose to be a problem. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Through the chair, Ms. Domboski, that's generally correct, and that's what we've been hearing. The current code does require a proof that co-location will occur, and it's frankly not very much used because used at all, because what the industry tells us is that they cannot get a complete guarantee contract signed before they build a tower due to the uncertainties in place for the approval process. And so were that to be the standard, and again, this is what they are telling us, for that to be the standard by which they would get the extra height for co-location, that would not happen because they would not be able to fulfill that requirement.
Sure, and just following up on that, Erica, as we walk through this process, our two overriding goals were, one, to encourage co-location, and two, to mitigate impact, especially in residential districts, therefore encouraging camouflage and stuff like that. So to me, when I see something like this and thinking about the actual implications it might have, I think it might be counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish. But one of the standards you look at, when you're going to approve them, you're going to be looking at other towers that are in the vicinity, right? So you'll be able to see if there's an availability of, hey, we approved this co-located tower and you want one, a block away, you're going to have to go talk to those people.
That's correct.
So to me, I think this is counterintuitive to what we're trying to accomplish. So I appreciate your comments. I won't be supporting it.
Thank you, Mr. Domboski. Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an issue that we discussed just about every time we had a meeting on the topic. And it was one of those compromises where the community members wanted some more assurance in the contract form that there would be co-location. The industry pointed out the realities that they deal with in far as legal requirements and getting somebody to contract to actually be on the pole with them. I thought, after all those meetings, I thought Mr. Dunbar's amendment was the best compromise. I thought the language was correct. I take issue with, Mr. Levine suggesting that this clarifies what the intent of this was. I know Mr. Levine raised this issue every time with us, and I think we ended up at the same place. I think Mr. Dunbar's amendment is the intent of the S1, at least as far as all the work sessions would go. So I, too, would be disapproving of this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Croft?
Yeah, briefly, I wanted to make sure that Mr. Levine's suggestions were considered. I think I agree with the discussion I've heard. And so, as weird as it is, yeah, I won't support it. I'm going to move the second one for the same reason and hear the testimony and see. But I wanted to make sure it was not ignored but actually considered.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I figured I should say just a couple words because it was my amendment that led to this one. I think Mr. Levine's comments are well taken, and I think this I understand what he's trying to do with this amendment, and I appreciate his concern as well. And when I was meeting with industry, I sort of expressed the same concern, but I ultimately came down in the same place that the other members of the bodies have expressed, Mr. Evans, Ms. Domboski. I do think that the language we were able to work towards previously has the greatest chance of actually being effective. And ultimately what we're trying to do is actually spur co-location, right? Because what we don't want to do is accidentally disincentivize it and lead to smaller but more towers. So I won't support this amendment to my amendment. But again, I appreciate that Mr. Levine continues to raise this. And I think in the future, if it turns out that the language we have written is being abused by the industry, I certainly would be open to coming back and trying it again. But I think that the amendment we have now is probably sufficient. Thank you. Thank
you, Mr. Dunbar. There's no one else in the queue. Please vote. That amendment failed 2-9. Are there any other amendments before we vote on the main motion? Okay. Mr. Croft.
Yeah, similarly, Mr. Levine's second proposal is on page 16, lines 21 through 27, starts by itself, paint schemes on antenna only, large macro. I'd move that as whatever number amendment we're on.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. I don't see anyone in the queue. Did we get a second for that?
I'll second.
No, thank you. I don't see anyone. Ms. Domboski.
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand this one, Erica. As I'm reading it, I'm not sure that it really has much effect, but what are your thoughts on this particular amendment?
Through the chair, Ms. Domboski, my understanding is that there's a concern that a monopole tower could be painted so that the bottom third or quarter was brown and the top was green, and that would be considered sufficient to meet the concealment standards. It's my opinion, having worked in planning for over a decade, that that would never be approved. It would not meet the intent nor the language of the concealment standards. And so while I do understand people's concerns about crazy things happening and you know, who knows who's going to be here in another 10 or 15 or 20 years, I really don't feel that anybody in the community is going to think that painting a monopole is sufficient to consider it a concealed tower. And so personally, I don't feel this amendment is necessary.
Okay. As I read it,
I'm sorry if I could just, the amendment takes, it's trying to apply the paint scheme language only to antennas and not to towers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. Mr. Croft?
Yeah, following up on that, so, I mean, there's very similar language already in the S1 version, so what's the difference by saying this type of language, that by itself it doesn't constitute camouflage, concealment, but could be considered concealment, changing it from the on the support structure or telecommunication facility, and this would say only, in fact, is the amendment narrower then? So right now, we have a broader requirement that says, look, just painting this isn't enough. It could be enough, but it isn't just enough on its own, and this is more narrow than it. Okay. In that sense, I'm worried, Mr. Levine, it goes backwards, and so I don't think it is as strong as the language that's already in the S1 version.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the reason I brought this amendment was because of a picture of an example that we had seen many times over the last year as we were working on this ordinance. And it was a picture of a church that had was made of brick that had a antenna on it that looked exactly like the church brick, and you could not tell that that was an antenna unless someone pointed it out to you. And so I wanted to put this amendment in there so that if someone was able to do that, that it would be permitted. And so I actually don't believe that this additional language is necessary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. There's no one else in the queue. Please vote on the proposed amendment before us. That amendment fails unanimously. Any other amendments before we vote on the main motion before us? Ms. Domboski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have an amendment, but may I speak to the main motion?
Certainly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start by thanking the working group, the members of the community, and last but absolutely not least are both Erica McConnell and Pete Peterson. Ernie Hall's not here, so I can't give him credit. But I don't know that Dennis Wheeler's here either, but all of those members have put in an incredible amount of time and effort in trying to strike a balance. This ordinance, I believe, is about 10 years too late. We've been talking about coming up with a cohesive cell tower policy for the municipality of Anchorage for long before I was here. I remember watching assembly meetings, hearing assembly members talking about it. And there's no question that as technology has improved, these things are popping up like daisies. They're coming all over the community. And the challenge we have as legislators is how do we integrate these things that provide the technology that everyone's demanding on their little cell phones that you have, and how do you do it to mitigate the impact, especially to residential users. It's a challenge. And as you heard me say a little earlier, the trick was we were trying to encourage co-location, number one, so there's less of them, but number two, so you don't have to look at them in every single corner. So by trying to encourage co-location and also camouflage technology to mitigate the impact, I was very skeptical when we talked about camouflage technology, because I thought, how do you camouflage, in some cases, a 100-foot tower? But as many have seen on my street, looking out my front window, there's a cell tower, and it's camouflaged, and it was put up when there were no leaves on the trees, and it blended pretty well. But now that it's summertime, you can't see it. I mean, it's a little bit taller, so if you know where to look, you'll be like, oh, there it is. But you really have to look, and so I think there is a balance that we've struck. There's definitely going to be people that aren't happy on both sides. Industry has clearly said they're not thrilled with it, but they can live with it. Members of the community have said they're really not happy with it. They don't want it. But then we go back to that issue of there's this demand from all of us with these cell phones, and we need coverage. We want it, but where do you put the towers? So I think this was definitely a very difficult issue. Mr. Peterson, I think you did a phenomenal job. Erica, I think you did a phenomenal job. And I voiced there's some things in here that I don't really care for very much, but I'm willing to give it a try. And I think Mr. Dunbar hit the nail on the head when he said, this is essentially the first step we're taking to cohesively try to have a cell tower policy for the municipality of Anchorage that considers small cell technology, and it considers camouflage technology, and it really considers incentivizing co-location. And if there's something in here that we missed, we're willing to come back and address it. But this is the first step in trying to come into the new age where everybody has this technology and they need the structures in place to support it. So I will be supporting it. I'm glad we're doing it. I know people in our community definitely want to see, as these things are integrated, that they're integrated with the least amount of impact. I know in Eagle River we've seen some water towers, some things go up that are just hideous, just ugly. And sometimes you can't avoid all of that. But I think this is a very good step to start to try to mitigate that. But I don't want to go without saying, I think Heather hit the nail on the head when she said, there are some technologies like small cell technology that would be the most preferable. And it seems, obviously, the small cell technology is conducive to urban areas, higher density. It wouldn't work in some of the more rural areas that I represent. But there is this seeming perception that industry is dragging their feet on some of the more technologically advanced technology that would be of least impact to the community. And, they may not be entirely happy with this, but this is a step in the right direction. But I hope industry would take it a step further, especially when you get in the very dense urban areas, to go to that technology that is essentially seamless. It blends right in. And I think that's ultimately where we would like to go, especially in the urban areas. But all in all, I think, I know there's been a lot of effort and compromise that has gone into this. And I personally, again, I know I've said it 3 times, but I really mean it, Mr. Peterson. I think you did a great job, and I think you struck the balance that could actually get the most amount of people on board. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Mr. Peterson.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate your help in getting me headed in the right direction on this. You were the one that named me the head of the working group, so and that was actually over a year ago already. So it was sort of a long and winding road to get to this position, and we had a lot of help, not only from members of the community, but also from Erica McConnell. She worked many, many hours on this, as well as Dennis Wheeler. Members of the Zoning Commission also helped out on several occasions. And I want to thank all the people of the community that came to the working group meetings, because we appreciated your input. It let us know what direction we needed to go and what direction was the wrong direction. And I realized early on that no matter where we went, that not everyone was going to be satisfied with this. And with my experience, that usually means you've met a reasonable compromise. If no one's completely happy, then probably you're somewhere down the middle. And I think that's where we ended up on this. We also were able to make this ordinance meet the federal law, because that needed to be changed. And we've updated it so we've incorporated new technology that's been developed since the old code was written. So I believe we're in a position where this is the best we can do right now. I'm not saying there aren't going to be additional amendments necessary going forward, but I would certainly appreciate my colleagues' support of this ordinance tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Trainee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pete, I appreciate your leadership in this. And Amy, thank you for being the head of our Title 21 committee. What he did was an offshoot of that, so thank you very much for leading us. It's not just cell phones, though. Data is increasing. I saw an ad recently for, I think it's a refrigerator that has 3 cameras in it that sends data to you constantly. And it's only going to increase as Americans are more dependent upon data transmission. We'll have more need for either towers or miniature towers. But thanks, I'll be supporting this.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Just a real simple thank you from me to my colleagues for all the work that went into this. Thank you. There's no one else in the queue. Please vote on the main motion before us, AO 2015-142 S1. This ordinance was approved unanimously. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You have to open the public hearing on this item, but once you're done with that, then I'll be moving to postpone this item indefinitely. This is Title 15. We've got a new version that was introduced tonight, laid on the table item. That will come up on July 12th. So anybody that's here to testify on this item, you might want to wait till July 12th when you can deal with the new ordinance. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Item 13, CAO 2016-38, to amend the provisions relating to housing, maintenance, and occupancy code. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none. Public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body? Mr. Trainee.
Madam Chairman, move to postpone this item indefinitely.
Second.
Please vote. This item was unanimously postponed indefinitely. We're now down to new public hearings. Item 14A, AR 2016-148, a resolution to name the children's playground located within Scenic Park, the Captain Cartier Playground. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Welcome, Mr. Honeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Assembly. Better thee than me in dealing with metal trees. I laud you all on the efforts. A great compromise. And so I know, as Ms. Dombowski mentioned, I remember being in this very room.
Excuse me, sir. For the record, could you please state your name and spell your last name?
Absolutely. Paul Honeman, H-O-N-E-M-A-N, and I'm a resident of Scenic Park in East Anchorage. And I'm here to talk about this particular ordinance in naming the playground area at Scenic Park in honor of Catherine Cart. There are those in our community, we call them leaders, and they certainly have taken the extra time out of their life to give service in either their part of town or their area of interest. And Kathy Cart is one of those people, along with several other members of the community are here tonight, who do that extra effort in taking on committee chairs in parks and public safety and just anything within the community that needs to be done. Kathy is one of those people, and of late she's been suffering with pretty serious illness. And one of the things that our community at Scenic Foothills wanted to do was in Scenic Park, which is a very small park. It's got tennis courts and now has a playground. And one of those people who were very instrumental in securing the funding from the state legislature and coordinated quite a bit, like a volunteer project manager, Mr. Rada may testify to that. I know that they were in concert and contact with the project people and as well as the subcontractor working with it. So I fully support this. I know Mr. Peterson and I actually presented this initially as a suggestion from the Community Council, and I'm just proud to be able to come in tonight and actually speak on behalf of this particular section. So I hope you pass and adopt this.
Thank you, Mr. Honeman.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none. Public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Ms. Dombrowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a technical question on procedure. Why don't we have to go through a naming panel for this?
We did.
I thought that they did.
Did I miss it? I don't see the report for, oh, it was right behind it. Oh, thank you. Never mind. Disregard.
Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to say that if she turned a couple more pages, you see the report from the naming panel. This has been requested by the Community Council. A very active person from the Scenic Park Community Council was involved in doing much-needed improvements in the playground there, and amongst many other duties that she took on herself as a member of the Community Council over the years. And I think it's very appropriate that we name the playground after her. And I was more than happy to bring this forward and co-sponsor with my former colleague, Mr. Honeman. And I'm encouraging support from my colleagues this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I would also like to enthusiastically support this resolution. This is my neck of the woods, as it is my predecessor, and Kathy's reputation precedes her. I would like to say one small technical or housekeeping thing. On line 21, it says Scenic Hills. It should read Scenic Foothills. Is there a way we can...
You can make a motion to make that amendment to the resolution.
So I'd like to make a motion to amend that to read Scenic Foothills Community Council.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson, second. Ask unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, that amendment is made and approved.
Thank you. And again, I just want to thank Mr. Honeman and Mr. Peterson for bringing that, and all the members of the community and the Community Council that brought this, and I urge passage. Thank you.
Thank you. There is no one else in the queue. Please vote on the main motion before us. Mr. Flynn? That's okay. Thank you. That resolution was approved unanimously. We are now at agenda item number 14B, a resolution appropriating a donation of $240,000 from the Anchorage Library Foundation donations. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none. Public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve. Second.
There's no one in the queue. Please vote. That item was approved unanimously. We are now at agenda item number 14C, AM 350-2016, Employee Relations Board appointments. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move approval.
Seeing no one in the queue, please vote. That item was approved unanimously. Mr. Weddleton, you wanted to make a motion?
I'd like to move to change the order of the day to move 14L to now. There's a time-sensitive issue.
Do we have a second? Please vote to change the order of the day to address item 14L. Phil was the second. Amy? Thank you. And Tim? Thank you. We are now at agenda item number 14L, AO 2016-70, waiving Title 23 permitting and temporary structure extension fees, waiving Title 23 cash bond for temporary structure, and waiving the design standards of AMC subsection 2109-080 for temporary structure for the Girdwood
Waive
Health
reading,
Clinic.
Madam Chair.
I'm done, Mr. Trainee. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Welcome, sir. Please state your name and spell your last.
Lou Thies, T-H-E-I-S-S, and I'm a volunteer board member with the clinic. And tonight I'm here with a fellow board member, Pat Price, and also the co-chair of the Girdwood Board of Supervisors, Tommy O'Malley, is also here. I guess first I want to thank everybody for, John Weddleton and Bill Evans for introducing this ordinance, and you guys for considering us down there. We really, really appreciate it. And I think I'm here to support the ordinance, of course, and I'll just tell you a very brief story about how all this happened. And that is, last August we got a federal grant from HRSA for a lot of money to expand the clinic. But the only money we got was for services. We didn't get any actual money to add on to the clinic or to do anything else. So all the money for this would have to come from program services and not actually from the grant. And I also wanted to mention that we have been actively seeking a new facility for some years now. We were in Rasmussen pre-development, and we had many meetings with old city manager George Ficalis, and we were very, very close, and then basically the state went broke and our development didn't go through. Now we're looking at federal tax credit for workforce development project down in Girdwood. And tomorrow we're meeting with, we have a stakeholders meeting at the hotel with a Federal Reserve representative and developers and builders and to include the clinic and the Little Bears in a new development. So that's just to assure you that this trailer isn't going to be there forever. Okay? And lastly, I just wanted to mention that the CHC network that was originally envisioned by Senator Ted Stevens is slowly but surely getting larger in our state. And the one in Girdwood is one of the few that doesn't get funding or isn't in a partnership with the local governance. And so we're kind of on our own, and that's why we really, really appreciate if we can get this through, because our program funds aren't as elastic as we'd like them. So that's all. So are there any questions?
Yes, sir. Mr. Trainee has a question.
Just got a question. Where you're located, we have so many problems along Turnagain Arm. Accidents. Are you going to have the ability to treat the people there, or are they going to have to still come into Anchorage? Some of them are so critical.
Well, it all depends what the problem is. We do have a digital X-ray, and we have a mid-level person that does orthopedics. Okay. But a lot of these, if it's a bad accident, they usually, life mid-flight or whatever.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is closed. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. My name is Tommy O'Malley, capital O, apostrophe capital M-A-L-L-E-Y, and I come as a minor elected official from Girdwood, representing the community through the Girdwood Board of Supervisors. In your packet, you'll see a resolution that the Girdwood Board of Supervisors passed in support of the waiver and the extension of time. I grew up with excellent medical care. Both my folks were doctors, and then my brother, when I moved to Girdwood, we had to go all the way into Anchorage, and there were some white-knuckle driving experiences. We found the Girdwood Clinic to be our medical home, and my son was so accident-prone that I got a punch card from them with Carrie Dorius's private cell number. They really took good care of us, and it's no stretch for me to come back and support them. The medical clinic started as a for-profit, and we met
when the owner, Kerry, wanted to retire, we met and decided to form a nonprofit organization. It fell to me to do that. I've started nonprofits, but this was going from a profit to a nonprofit, and the IRS scrutinized our application very closely, found nothing wrong and that we were genuine, and gave us a nonprofit status. Now that year, Alyeska Resort dropped their health insurance for 600 employees with 1 month notice, and that left people without any kind of health care. It's health insurance, but really it's health care. So as a nonprofit, the clinic could then treat people without regard regardless of their ability to pay. Like my dad used to do it. We'd get fish, or people would bring us things. They got a great big grant, which seems really big to us. It's the same kind of grant that the Anchorage Neighborhood Health Clinic, the big building on C Street, and our building is a lot smaller, but it follows a lot of the same federal regulations. And I mean, you guys know red tape. The feds are one level higher, and they have some requirements, and one of them is that they need a certain amount of space. The only way to get that space practically, to follow the timeline, is to get a modular building to add on to it. And I urge that you allow this waiver, allow an extension. They are trying to move out, but as it is, we need them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome, sir.
Thank you. My name is Pat Price, P-R-E-I-S is my last name. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I hope we can count on your support regarding this ordinance. In response specifically to Mr. Trainey's question, I'd like to point out that the clinic does support or provide emergency service as well as primary care service, and we have an agreement. I'm sorry, I may have forgotten to say I'm on the board of directors of the clinic also, but that's why I'm saying we have an agreement with the local EMS service to work in partnership with them, but it's really up to the EMTs to determine the level or the extent of injuries and what the required care would be. If the clinic can provide the services required, they do bring patients directly to the clinic, but otherwise for trauma or extensive injuries, of course they go to Anchorage to an emergency room. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none. Mr. Weddleton.
Move to approve.
There's no one in the queue. Please vote. That item was approved unanimously. We are now back to agenda item number 14D. Mr. Trainey.
Madam Chair, move to combine item 14D and item 14E.
We need a second. Ask unanimous consent to combine 14D and 14E. And seeing no objection, these resolution ordinances are combined. Public hearing is now open on AR 2016-168, collective bargaining agreement between the municipality of Anchorage and the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 302. Both of the documents have the same title. Anyone wish to be heard?
Different numbers, though.
Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none. Public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve, Madam Chair, 2016-59. Excuse me, 2016-168 first, ma'am. It's item 14D.
Okay. No one in the queue. Please vote. That item was approved 10-1. Mr. Trainey.
Madam Chair, move to approve 2016-59.
Not approved, Mr. Trainey. Postpone indefinitely.
Postpone indefinitely, ma'am.
Thank
Sorry.
You. Thank you, sir.
Need to read my
We
writing.
need a second. Please vote. Ta-da. That's okay. That item is postponed indefinitely. We are now on agenda item number 14F, AR 2016-165, Heritage Land Bank 2016 Annual Work Program and 2017 to 21 5-year management plan. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. There's no one in the queue. Please vote. That item was approved unanimously. We are now at agenda item number 14G, AR 2016-175, appropriating $5.5 million of settlement proceeds for the port litigation escrow account. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. There's no one in the queue. Please vote. That item was approved unanimously. We are now on agenda item number 14H, AO 2016-66, amending Chapter 12.20 to establish the duties and responsibilities of room rental hosting platform and to establish an alternative registration process for operators who are hosting platform to conduct room rental transactions. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Welcome, ma'am. Please state your name, spell your last.
Good evening. My name is Mary Rydesky, R-Y-D-E-S-K-Y. I'm a local citizen and owner of a bed and breakfast, and I serve as president of the Anchorage, Alaska Bed and Breakfast Association, hereafter called AABBA. To date, we know that not all accommodations are licensed and registered locally, that vacation rentals and Airbnbs are alternatives that are fairly high profile. We're well acquainted with the problem the Assembly is trying to bring before the public because we follow the growth of alternative accommodations for reasons of competition. The Muni's intent to create a system for collection of tax is one with which our association agrees. The AABBA is a professional organization. We have approximately 50% of the licensed and Muni permitted B&Bs in our membership. And that membership requires any member to have an Alaska business license, a Muni permit, tax collection ID, and several other documents, including health and safety priorities that have to be met. Having said that, the AABBA does not support the amendment to the 1220 room tasks as drafted in 2016-66. No doubt the Muni is seeking a method that would require interface with fewer entities, those which you are calling hosting platforms, in place of several hundred business licensed entities and even more that operate with neither license or permit. However, this approach raises far too many concerns, and we expect that it may not operate smoothly. As proposed, this 2016-66 questions that it raises range from definition to application. There are 5 areas that we see issues with: the definitions, the policies, the ability to enforce, cost of process, and unintended consequences. I do not intend to address those all, but I will bring to mind a couple of things that are issues right now. First of all, this term hosting platforms is a very difficult one for us to wrap our arms around. In the industry, we call what I think you're talking about an OTA, an online travel agency. The difficulties with your definition, as stated, will represent issues for small businesses that are legitimate in the municipality, as well as those who are maybe on the fringe. And I would suggest that we separate those which are marketing engines from true revenue-producing or collecting agencies, therefore requiring a redefinition of a hosting platform. There are many other things that we can say about OTAs. For one, they change all the time. They are national and international in scope, and I'm a big supporter at Anchorage, but I'd like to see how we have the enforcement capabilities to get the likes.
Your time is up, ma'am.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Starr?
I'd like you to summarize, maybe another couple minutes, if you will. It's valuable testimony.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Please continue, ma'am.
Our issues are multiple on this. I think there are many things we need to address. I would like to suggest that this not be passed and that we have more time to come up with some consideration which will allow us to all see that these taxes are collected and in support of Alaska tourism without the ramifications that my fellow members in the business are concerned we're overlooking at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Starr, you have a question?
Yeah, this is an interesting topic as it relates to vacation travel as well as just rooms for rent for the general public. My question to you and your organization, when you perhaps did a Google search that talks about bed and breakfast in Anchorage, would your agency or organization pop up as a sort of a clearinghouse of information?
Well, we wish it would come up higher in the rankings, but yes, we do. And so we would fall, as I read this amendment, as a collection, and we are not. How can you tell on a website who is and who is not when we hire what's called an API that appears on our website, but we don't handle any of the funds whatsoever?
Yeah, well, and the qualifying statement is it doesn't matter who collects the money for the rent. So if you were collecting the money for the rent and forwarding on to the owners, that'd be one thing, but you're really just facilitating the clearinghouse of information. So that's a valid distinction. I appreciate your digging into the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Thank you, ma'am, for being here. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body? Mr. Weddleton.
Well, I'm sorry. Is it Mr. Dunbar has made a motion? Or?
We've got no motion.
Right.
He's in there.
And a second, yeah.
Okay, I'd like to move to continue the public hearing until Mr. Moore or someone else with the administration can meet with the Bed and Breakfast Association and others. And I could speak to that.
A specific meeting date, Mr. Weddleton? The next meeting is July 12th.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Starr?
I didn't mean to speak over the top, but unless I missed it, did we have a work session on this very topic?
Yes, we did, Mr.
Yeah, I missed it. Was there working notes that came out of that? Because I didn't get any forwarded to me.
Madam Chair, if I could.
Certainly, Mr. Flynn.
There was a brief PowerPoint, Mr. Starr, but I guess the two salient takeaways that I came from that is any entity that enters in one of these agreements is one that's collecting on behalf. So I think part of the bed and breakfast concerns are addressed there, and that the administration had asked that we approve this post haste so that they could collect third quarter transactions, which they're not collecting now, and this is the last meeting before the third quarter begins, and also that it will help finalize their deal with Airbnb that they're close to. And the final thing, I had an amendment, which I think you saw referenced on page 3, that if we're going to move forward tonight, I'll move it. If we're going to hold off, I can hold off on that too.
I certainly would like to support the delay for that conversation. I think this organization brings valid concerns, so the idea that we have to hurry to collect money isn't always a motivator for me. I'd rather just collect it correctly and right. So I think the deal with that, but I also would like to speak to the main motion later. So
thank you, Mr. Starr. Madam Clerk? Mr. Weddleton, is your motion to postpone until the July 12th meeting?
If that's our next meeting.
It is our next meeting. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. You're in the queue. Did you want to speak?
Well, I'd like to speak to this. I think we did have a work session on this, but we did not have industry people at that work session. They apparently weren't notified. And in conversations with Mr. Moore, he did do quite a lot of research, but there was not reaching out to the small operators. And I've spoken to a number of them, and when they read this and looked at it, their collective response was, we support the idea, but they just don't get it. So if the people who are most affected by this don't understand what it's doing, we have a problem. So it could be changing words more typical of what the industry uses, some minor tweaks, but we should get it so that the industry understands it and so it works for them. So I think we're not too far away from that.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, just before we vote to postpone, I would like to hear again from the administration, someone, whether it's Mr. Moore or someone else, maybe Mr. Abbott, someone who is able to speak to this, if that's all right, Madam Chair.
Certainly, Mr. Dunbar.
I seem to recall something like what Mr. Flynn had said about the necessity of having this in place so that we could get revenue during the peak tourism season, but perhaps I'm misremembering.
Okay, through the chair to Mr. Dunbar, my name's Dan Moore, City Treasurer. I did listen to the testimony, and we did have a work session. So we tried to emphasize in the work session that the ordinance is only addressing hosting platforms. They do not affect online reservation services. So what you heard on the testimony is not applicable to this ordinance. The key for a hosting platform is an entity who voluntarily agrees to collect and remit the room tax to the city. There is no requirement at all for an online reservation system to be part of this ordinance. So, in terms of the delay, it is detrimental in terms of revenue to the city by delaying. We can explain the ordinance to the industry, but it really, and we work very closely with the law department, it has nothing to do with online reservation systems. So there's just sort of a fundamental misunderstanding there.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Starr.
I'll come back in the queue if we pass that amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr.
Or don't,
Mr. Evans. Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Okay, thank you.
In general, and I think just to reiterate Mr. Moore's point that this is a voluntary program. So if somebody is unsure about whether they're a hosting platform or concerned that they might be a hosting platform, it's not like they are going to be drawn into having to do anything. There would be plenty of time afterwards to see if they want to participate once they understand it more. Given the fact that it's not compulsory, I have no problems not delaying this. I thought the work session outlined it pretty well, and I'm more comfortable moving forward with the ordinance tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. There is no one else in the queue. Based on Mr. Dunbar, it looks like you have something to say. Okay, thank you. Well, let's vote on Mr. Weddleton's proposed amendment to postpone this until the meeting of July 12th. Please vote. Yes. Thank you. That postponement fails 3-8. That will not be postponed. We have before us the main motion.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to amend.
Or was it? Yeah, I thought it was. No, you're right. Mr. Flynn, before you move on, the clerk advises me that there was not a motion to approve, so if I may have a motion to approve in a second, that would be great.
Motion to approve.
We'll pretend my first motion was to approve, and then I'll make another one. How's that?
Second.
We had a first and second to approve the main motion. Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're
I'd like to
welcome.
move to amend on page 3, line 2, replace the word remits with collects. Line 2 on page 3.
Croft seconded, right?
And if I have a second from Mr. Croft, looks like. So for those who were not at the work session, this is just to clarify, if one of these hosting platforms collects money and then from an operator and then for some reason doesn't pay the municipality, I don't want that operator on the hook. They've made the agreement. They've got a surety bond with the municipality. The hosting platform should be responsible for that. So once they've collected the money, as far as I'm concerned, the operator's responsibility is resolved. That's the purpose of the amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Flynn's amendment, there's no one in the queue. Please vote. That amendment was approved unanimously. We now have before us the main motion. Please vote. I'm sorry, Mr. Starr, please.
Thank you.
Okay.
Through the chair, Mr. Falsey, does the contract with ACVB need to be rewritten as their duties and responsibilities? The inference is that now they would be, I would think they'd be required to tender services thereof for the marketing.
Through the chair, the answer is no. As Assemblymember Evans and Flynn have emphasized, this ordinance only allows a hosting platform to volunteer to collect bed taxes on behalf of operators. There's no obligation for anyone to actually do that, and the Anchorage Convention and Visitors Bureau, I assume, would not assume that responsibility.
Let me ask the question a different way. The fees for the bed tax collections are allocated some of them to Visit Anchorage, then I'll use that word as opposed to ACVB. So does Visit Anchorage's revenue just automatically grow based on the amount of collections? That's the first question. And secondarily, do we need to revisit their responsibilities to market at a broader level now that we're incorporating others into the mix, such as Airbnb or that?
Through the chair, the answer to the first question is yes. Bed taxes are 12%, 4% approximately, with some very minor adjustments. 4% goes to Visit Anchorage, 4% goes to retire the Denina Center Convention Center bonds, and the remaining 4% goes to general government. To the second question, I don't know that this ordinance causes any need to revisit our relationship with Visit Anchorage, but certainly it's always a topic that could be raised. That this ordinance could be expected to recover more bed taxes than we might otherwise recoup, but it doesn't fundamentally change the nature of our relationship with Visit Anchorage or the services that they're providing for us.
Well, if we incorporate Airbnb or the other online hostings that they voluntarily come to that, it would make sense that the Visit Anchorage people would expand their marketing to suggest that those are valid operators to bargain. If we're going to go ahead and say you're licensed to do business in the city, thank you very much for your money, now what are we going to give them? That would be my suggestion, is to look at that language for Visit Anchorage and perhaps make it a requirement to entice others to either enroll in the program because they get something for their money, or to hold Visit Anchorage accountable for maybe changes in technology and new marketing. So I don't run the executive branch, but I do see the Visit Anchorage contract from time to time, as well as how much money they get. So it would make sense if there was an agreement or discussion going on, as you suggest with Airbnb and the others, that we entice them that they're going to get something for collecting the money on our behalf, as well as we make Anchorage a more attractive and affordable place to visit. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. There's no one else in the queue. Please vote on the main motion. This ordinance was approved unanimously. We are now at agenda item number 14J, AO 2016-65, authorizing the disposal by perpetual, non-exclusive telephone and electrical easement on a portion of Heritage Land Bank Parcel 1-110. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be 14J, 14I. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body? Can I have a motion to approve?
Move to approve, Madam Chair.
Second? Please.
Second.
Thank you. There's no one in the queue. Please vote. That item was approved unanimously. We are now at agenda item number 14J, AO 2016-67, an ordinance amending Title 9 and 25 of the Anchorage Municipal Code to define high-speed electric bicycles and to address the regulation of high and low-speed electric bicycles. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Welcome. Please state your name and spell your last.
Kerry Shifley, S-H-I-F-L-E-A. Thank you for your time here, and I want to just say thank you to Vice Chair Traney for bringing this topic up and clarifying some of the confusion regarding these bicycles. The history of my store is Alaska E-Bike. I'm the president and founder. I founded it last year in June of 2015. Just recently, in the last few months, moved the store here into Anchorage as the market is growing and we're seeing more sales here. So we have a full online store and have grown over 500% in just the last 6 months. We've seen positive benefits from our citizens being able to get back out on the trails through either hip replacements, knee injuries, a whole kind of smattering of different life events that have brought people out of biking, and these electric assist bicycles allow them to get back out on the trails. And we delivered a bike to a lady in the South Side district there, and she was out riding on the coastal trail. I called her back that afternoon, and she hadn't been out there in 10 years. So to open these trails back to the citizens who used to enjoy them in their younger years, but now can see them again. I haven't seen the updated version of the ordinance, but I know Vice Chair Traney was moving to include them in soft surface trails as well. If that's included and the low-speed electric bicycles are allowed on all trails in Anchorage, we recommend that you move forward and vote yes for these. It aligns it with federal law and allows more people to use the trails.
Thank you, sir. There are no questions. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome.
My name is Daniel De Cordova, D-E-C-O-R-D-O-V-A. I'm the founder of Mad Boy Electric Vehicles. For the past 10 years, I've been designing and building electric bicycles in Seattle. I'm also an instructor, hold an instructor rating for the Light Electric Vehicle Association, which is an international body. I have actually just this week moved my company here to Anchorage to manufacture low-speed electric bicycles specifically for soft surface trails. So I was a little shocked to find this happening with this kind of timing. What Mr. Shifley has said is, all 100% true. There might be a little bit of a tempest in a teapot controversy over trail access for electric bicycles. Most of the arguments against them tend to be against vehicles that are not electric bicycles. They're against electric motorcycles. They're against internal combustion motorcycles. These electric bicycles are designed specifically to fit into existing bicycle traffic. So they're in the bike lane, they're on the trails. They tend to move slower than most experienced riders are riding, but they also allow for less impetus towards what we call bad behavior on trails. There's no need to hold on to your momentum, so you won't have people taking corners unsafely. Basically, every bad habit that trail riders have is mitigated by the presence of the electric bike. Just the ability to accelerate back up to speed allows for a much safer riding style. It also, as Mr. Shifley was saying, does allow for a much larger percentage of the population to get out and enjoy the trails, which are, after all, public infrastructure. So I would just like to urge this body to ensure that electric bicycles are allowed on soft surface trails in Anchorage. And I think we're going to very much enjoy the results.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar has a question.
Yeah, just very quickly. Mr. Peterson brought this to my attention earlier, too. We're always excited to hear about new manufacturing in Anchorage. Where are you going to be putting your shop, do you think?
It really depends on a couple of factors, one of them being just what kind of pre-orders we can get going. If we're going to need to be building 100 bikes in a special frame, that's one size. If we really do well and we're building 300, well, it's actually a different equation.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be back. My name is Lance Ahern, A-H-E-R-N. And so I just wanted to testify in support of some of our new young businessmen here in Anchorage. It's really important that the bikes be able to be used with that electric assist technology on the soft trails that we have in Anchorage. They talked a little bit about kind of some of their target market in terms of older folks, people with health issues. This improves their independence, their mobility, their ability to get out and recreate in Alaska, so it improves everybody's quality of life. There was a little misunderstanding in the documents that I read online about this, and I saw language somewhere that said there was no cost involved. For us out here who might be interested in buying these bikes, if they can't be used on the soft trails, I have to have two bikes, right? I need the bike I want to use around town, this bike to help me get around, and now I need another bike to go out on the trails. And now my wife needs two. So now we're paying for 4 bikes. You're not just buying 4 bikes, now you're maintaining 4 bikes. You need a bigger garage. It just kind of escalates pretty quickly. So there are real costs involved in not being able to use these bikes on soft trails. They talked about new business here in Anchorage, so it was great to see Kerry decide to move his business here for Matsu. Danny mentioned he's come up from Seattle. I think everybody knows here now in the economy that we have how hard it is to get new, young tech businesses to decide to make the move up here to Anchorage. It's a really big thing for us. I serve as the managing director for Launch Alaska, and the municipality through the 49th State Angel Fund is actually one of our investors. And this company is actually one which we chose to make an investment in. They actually turned down our money because they didn't need it because they're selling bikes and they didn't want to take on the debt. But we're still really glad to see him here and we want to help them be successful. So I think that's pretty much it. Just thank you for all of your work and I hope you will support the use of the new technology on the soft trails. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing seen none. Public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Madam Chair, move to approve 2016-67. Now I've got an amendment.
Mr. Trainee?
got an amendment that's been handed. I think everybody's got a copy of it. What it does is allow the bikes on soft paths. We first tried to do this. We didn't quite hit it right. This one does. It's going to allow fat-tired electric bikes. As America ages, this is something I think we need for this town. And some people are worried about, are they going to be burning out and peeling out? You can't. The bikes are slow. It takes a while to get up to speed. There's no big takeoff when you push the electric motor. And I think Mr. Wilton rode one today, didn't you? John?
I did, and I'd like to speak to that at some point.
Thank you. Anyway, what I'd like to do is move this amendment. I want to amend it. It's in front of us with this one, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. On Mr. Trainee's amendment, Mr. Starr?
By illustrating the ability to do this, are we going to get in trouble with the hikers and places that are already prohibitive to bikes?
Personally, I don't think we will. I mean, you never know. Bill, there's always some people that have their corner and they don't want anybody else there. And I don't think that'll be a problem with this. We're not talking about something really fast. These are low speed as defined by the federal government.
Well, I get that. I just don't, some of the trails, Eagle River Nature Center trails, for example, they start out with the no bike symbol in there. I've often wondered who decides that. So,
Well, like anything else, I think, Bill, we have to change. And I think the fact that we've got two business owners willing to move their industry to...
Oh, yeah. I'm fully supportive of it, Mr. Trainee. I'm looking at the soft trail conversation that you've just raised, however, though, as it relates to where those can go. And so we don't post and placard our soft trail networks in my community as well as we do the bike trails, the bike lanes, the advertising of this is where bikes go. And so my question wasn't to say that it isn't a good idea to have electric bike support. It's a matter of saying, does your unpaved expansion start to force a question, perhaps in places we're not ready to go. In ours, it's erosion and it's encroachment in places that shouldn't have bikes that can go fast, dog walkers, slow people getting run over by bikes. That's really where we come at it from a trail safety perspective. So if your answer is that you're not intending, then I would hope enforcement, when those bikes start showing up on trails that aren't intended for bikes, that you stand behind that policy call.
I will.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Mr. Trainee's proposed amendment, Mr. Weddleton.
Maybe I'll speak generally. I do support this amendment, and I did not this morning, and for many of the reasons that Mr. Starr spoke. I was worried. I do feel like we should have a speed limit on our trails. 20 miles an hour is much too fast on our pathways throughout the city. However, we're not addressing that here. I was concerned that these bikes would allow much higher speeds on the trails, but having ridden two of them this morning, I found what they do is they help you accelerate up to speed fairly easily, but actually found them very hard to get much over 20 miles an hour, whereas on my typical bicycle, I can get over 20 miles an hour very, very easily. So the footprint from the tires is similar to any other normal bicycle. So I do support this. I do find they would be appropriate on dirt trails. These will be regulated as bicycles, so on trails which I think are appropriately marked no bicycling, these would also not be allowed.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Evans, on Mr. Trainee's proposed amendment.
Yeah, just real briefly, I support the amendment. I think it's common sense. We have great unpaved trails in Anchorage that are great for mountain biking. There should be no reason why these type of bikes, which really aren't any more dangerous or destructive than anybody's mountain bike, shouldn't be allowed on as well. It does open up these great trails to a lot of other people who otherwise couldn't enjoy it in the same way, so I support it.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Steele.
Yeah, I agree. Like anything else, new people on the trails are going to be judged by how they act and interact. And so I would caution folks as they get out there to remember it's used by everybody. And I was encouraged by Mr. Weddleton's point about the bike and speed. It does open up a lot of trails to people who are my age or approaching my age. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Ms. Zimboski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my question's been answered, but I would like confirmation from Mr. Falsey. I just want to ensure there's not unintended consequences to what Mr. Starr brought up. By changing the amendment from bike path to pathway, will that have an impact on those pathways now, on those trails now that do not allow bikes?
Through the chair, I believe the answer to that is no. Bike path is actually not even a defined term in the code now and is used only sparingly. I think there are about 3 provisions in the entire municipal code that use it. Bike path is a more defined code under Title 21. I do not believe that this ordinance would affect the ability of Parks and Recreation to define trails to be pedestrian only or to exclude bicycle usage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to point out that I was informed that one of the fastest growing types of bikes that they're selling that are motorized, that are electric, are fat tire bikes. And those bikes actually spread the weight out more evenly, so they actually don't sink into the trail as much as a thin-tired bike, so they would do much less damage or leave much less of a mark on an unpaved trail than a regular bike would. So I support this amendment. I think there's a good chance we could have great growth with this industry here in Anchorage. I've seen great growth in fat tire bikes over just the last couple of years, and I think it's going to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. No one else in the queue on Mr. Trainey's proposed amendment. Please vote. That was passed unanimously. We now have the main motion before us. No one's in the queue. Please vote. That ordinance was approved unanimously. We're now at agenda item 14K, AO 2016-69, amending Anchorage Municipal Code, Chapter 16.65, to prohibit smoking and vaping in Town Square Park. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard?
Hello, my name is Jason Agre, and I'm here to talk
Can you
about
spell your last name, please, sir?
AGRE.
Thank you.
And I'm here to talk about the fluoride in the water supply, and basically what I've been reading, I read an article.
Sir, that is not the subject that we're discussing right now.
Oh, I thought it was public.
No.
Here, I thought we just closed off. Okay.
Soon. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Anyone wish to be heard on ordinance 2016-69? Welcome. Nice to see you. Yeah, please state your name and spell your last.
Thank you. My name is Kate Giard. My last name is spelled Giard. I'm here in support of AO 21669. I'm the trustee responsible for the building located at 520 West 6th Avenue and the retail clothing business known as 6th Avenue Outfitters, which is located downtown directly across from Town Square Park. I'm also a potential partner in Green Raven, Alaska, which will apply for a license for a cannabis retail store, which may be located 520 West 6th Avenue, depending on how that turns out. I have 3 points to make very quickly. For the past few months, I've had a bird's eye view of Market Square from my office located on the second floor of the building. It was the old library, so it's got windows that are beautiful and they look right out on the square. What I see on a daily basis are groups of people, mainly younger children, younger people smoking and vaping and hanging out in the park, and tourists going by the park but not really walking through the park. From the perspective of the business owner on the park, I think making smoking illegal will improve the park and our citizens' and tourists' appreciation of the park. As a potential proprietor of Green Raven, the single most common comment I get as I go around and talk to people about the potential of having a cannabis retail store downtown is the fear that people will walk out of our store and go across the street and smoke in the park. I mean, it's a real concern for most people I talk to. We've developed a neighborhood response plan and, have developed our response to that by providing instructional materials and letting people know it's illegal, and working with the security ambassadors and our own security team when someone may be buying our product and heading across the street. But I think having it very clear that there's a fine and that it's illegal just to smoke anything on the park would help this potential business and maybe all the marijuana businesses that may be located downtown. So that was my second point. My third is in the ordinance itself, the definition of electronic smoking device, which states it means it's a device or electronic or battery-operated device that will deliver tobacco or marijuana vapors. Non-tobacco, I think you have to insert the word non-tobacco because many of the vapor liquids that are sold don't have any tobacco in them at all, no nicotine. So really you're talking about nicotine and not tobacco. And it may be that you want to include the words non-tobacco as well as tobacco.
Thank you. Mr. Trainee has a question.
Pete, it's always good to see you. Welcome back. It's been a while.
Yes, sir. Nice to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Thank you. Good to see you. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyone else wish to be heard?
Yeah, also. Hi, my name is Jason Ager. I'll speak on this issue here, and regarding the town square, if you're going to close it for smoking, maybe you can think about opening up another little park somewhere around downtown where it's allowed, so that we're not just draconian with shutting down. No, we got to have security. We got to arrest people if we see them have a puff. Maybe you have like a Puff the Magic Dragon little area in a little park somewhere. Maybe that where Captain Cook Monument is. Or just an idea.
Thank you.
Give that your consideration. Thank you very much.
Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome, sir. Please state your name, spell your last.
My name's Ed Larrabee, and I'm a voter. And I don't know, I think this is trivial. I think that being a history of the country where we used to give cigarettes to soldiers for free, and we probably still do, I mean, I don't smoke tobacco, but I look at the rights of people that do. And you can't smoke in this building, you can't smoke in that place, you can't, where does it end? Right here. I think this is outside. I don't have any trouble with that. If it was inside, okay, you're stuck in there. But if you're on the outside, I imagine pollution from automobiles is next. So, I think we all lighten up on that. And by the way, I heard on the radio that my friend Dick Trainee, if this fails, he's going to bring it up again. I'll probably be here again to say, I don't think this is anything. This is all trivial. I think, if a person wants to smoke tobacco outside, who cares? It's going to blow away. Look at the pollution we have. That's more, I think that would be more detrimental. Well, anyway, that's my view.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none?
Madam Chair, move the approval of
Mr. Trainee, I'm sorry. There's one more person. Thank you. Welcome. Please state your name, spell your last.
Kevin McGee, M-C-G-E-E. Initially, I had no intent of speaking on this, but from a personal perspective, as a reformed smoker of 27 years ago, for me personally, I can't stand anymore the smell of cigarette smoke. I walk through it and I just can't. I just don't like it, period. I know there are some that say, well, they feel they have to have a cigarette. That's their own choice. But for me, if I were going through a public venue and so forth, even going into a grocery store and so forth, the fact that I have to walk through it and I smell it, it bothers me. So personally, I'm in support of this. I choose you would have the best judgment on this, and I would support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Trainee has a comment or question.
How many years did you spend in the military?
Total, 22.
Okay. I spent 39, so we spent about the same amount of time, give or take a few years.
I was Army.
Okay, well, I was Air Force, different group. When we first came in, they told you if you got them, light them.
Correct.
That changed over the years.
That's correct.
And you go to Elmendorf now, most areas are off limits to smoking. In fact, the number one health problem the VA is facing right now is cancer caused by tobacco smoking.
Yes, sir.
It's a huge health care cost, and they're realizing the problems of the smoking. So those of us, we have a lot of friends that have died from cancer that were prior military.
When I first went in back in 1971, cigarettes were issued to us by way of C rations.
Yeah.
And
those, didn't we?
That we did away with those.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none. Public hearing is now closed. Mr. Trainee.
Madam Chair, move to approve AO 2016-69.
Need a second, please? Thank you. Mr. Steele.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I had a couple of amendments. The people have kind of brought up a point that I was concerned with when we were approving marijuana, was that we had all the apparatus to sell it, in the ordinances, but we didn't have any place to be able to use it. You have tourists come into town and they can't use it at the hotel, can't use it in a car, can't use it on the sidewalk, but we'll sell it to you. And this is a similar situation, I believe. I think that I think about the PAC, and you go to events, and then they take a break, and you go out, and they have sweets to sell, and sometimes a drink or something too. But there's a lot of people that still go to those events and would like to take that break to have a cigarette. So I'm not against cleaning up the park to make it usable for folks. And so I've got a couple of amendments that I would like to propose. The first one is on page 2 of the line 11 and 12. I'd like to delete line 11 and 12 and delete lines 31 and 33, which basically removes the reference of the Center for Performing Arts property, so that the performing arts can make their own decision as to where or if smoking would be allowed. But it keeps the idea to try to clean up the park. That's number one. And then you want to do them one at a time? Okay. Right. So that's the first one, Madam Chair. It is page 2, line 11 and 12, and lines 31, 33.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. I think that it's one amendment with the same reference, correct?
Yes, it is, actually.
Thank you.
So you want to do them both at the same time?
Thank you, Mr. Steele.
All right. The second amendment is
one at a time.
Or the second part of that first amendment.
Ms. Dombowski?
Sorry, I'll second Mr. Steele's amendment, but I would like a little clarity. I think when he says lines 11 and 12, that's on page 2.
That's correct.
And on page 3, it's lines 31 through 33. Right?
That's correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure I was tracking.
Thank you, Ms. Dombowski. Mr. Evans, on Mr. Steele's proposed amendment.
Yes, just real briefly, I'm, inalterably opposed to the underlying ordinance, but since this limits it somewhat, I'll support this, but eventually vote against the Mr. Trainee's ordinance.
Well, thank you for sharing, Mr. Evans. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Evans and Madam Chair. I support this amendment. I had the opportunity to speak with Ms. Harbour, Nancy Harbour, who works at the PAC, and she didn't want to take a position on the overall on the amendment or on the underlying ordinance, because she hadn't spoken with her superiors about it, or the people she worked with about it. But it did sound like, from her perspective, that there were some people that use intermission or stagehands, for example, that maybe would be impacted by this in an inadvertent way. And I think that this amendment addresses those possible concerns. And again, I'm not imputing on her any opposition to this or support for the amendment. I just sort of relaying the conversation that we had. And unfortunately, she couldn't be here tonight because I believe she's traveling. But I just want to say that I support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Croft.
have two concerns about the amendment that my neighbor and friend brought forward. And it's the opposite of Mr. Evans. I think I support the underlying legislation, but have concerns about this. The first is, I mean, obviously inside the PAC is already non-smoking, as we know, so we're really talking about that area outside by the stairs, outside in what would be the road if it had continued through, that sort of cement way on the side, and maybe the sidewalk. I'm not sure the status of that. But so the first concern is a practical one. If we're going to outlaw it on the town square, you run the risk of moving a whole population onto where people come in and out of from the PAC. And you create kind of a safe place for that right next door. And so I worry that we undermine what we're trying to do. I also have a little bit of a worry that we're, I mean, if we want to allow smoking or ban smoking, we can do that. But the more we try and target it to a very specific population, the more we run the risk of not just using our power for a smoking ban or a non-smoking ban, but sort of a targeting. Somehow, homeless people smoking in the park is bad, and theater goers smoking right near the park is okay. Troubles me. It seems like we ought to do or not do this. And so I believe we should do it. I believe it's a significant problem downtown. I believe that is part of the problem. And so we can do this, but we shouldn't be too cute in doing it. So I think I support the underlying, and have a lot of concerns about the difference and the judgment that this makes.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Dombrowski?
Thank you. I just have a couple areas of clarification I need for Mr. Falsey, just to remind me. It's been a while since we've done some of the marijuana ordinances. As I'm reading this, my understanding is people will not still be able to consume or smoke within 20 feet of a municipal building entrance. Is that right, Mr. Falsey?
Yes, that is correct. That is unchanged in the language, and it appears on page 3. It's subsection 4.
So we take this out. You still can't smoke within the entrances of the PAC. But my second question, can you remind me of the marijuana ordinance as it relates to consumption in public? My recollection is consumption in public isn't allowed. So does that marijuana ordinance cover vaping as well, if there's marijuana product in the device?
Through the chair, I'll see if I can pull that up. My recollection is that we may have referred to the actual burning of marijuana, which would lead to some question about whether it captured vaping as well.
Oh, I don't remember that. But that doesn't mean anything.
I would have to pull this out of the code. It might take a few minutes here, but it may be that we just used consumption generally, in which case this would be something of a belt and suspenders approach.
Okay.
Where do you smoke?
If you can get back to me, we can move on, but you can get back to me on this, because I think it'll go to my underlying vote potentially on the entire ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. If there's no one else in the queue, we're voting on the proposed amendment from Mr. Steele. Please vote. That amendment passes 7-3. Pete didn't vote. Well, what is your vote, Mr. Peterson?
You cleaned it off. Just tell her.
We're gonna do this again. Did you reset it? What was your vote, Mr. Peterson? Yes or no? Yes. Thank you. 8-3, that passes. We now have the main motion before us. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I may have hinted previously, I'm not a fan of this ordinance. We dealt with it last year. I applaud Mr. Trainey's tenacity in bringing it back again. It hasn't changed. It hasn't gotten any better. The biggest problem with this, and I think even Mr. Croft's comments hit on it a bit, is that it's not an anti-smoking ordinance because we allow smoking in all other public parks, outdoors, everywhere, on the sidewalks around Town Square. It's an anti-homelessness person ordinance, because that's really what we're targeting. That's why we're targeting it to this park. I think Mr. Croft hit on it exactly. We are trying to gain control of the behavior in Town Square Park that we don't approve of. And I'm all in favor of that. Town Square Park is a bit of a mess. And we do need to take steps, I think, to get that to be a place where residents of Anchorage can feel safe and secure and enjoy the park. However, in doing that, I don't think the proper approach is to limit regular, law-abiding citizens' right to engage in what is lawful activity. I don't smoke. I agree with the gentleman. I hate walking through a haze of smoke. But I do recognize that, this is America, and people outdoors can smoke. We've driven them out of establishments for health reasons. I'm not aware of any known medical science that says smoking outdoors is, great danger for secondhand smoke. Otherwise, we'd have taken care of that. This is targeted to address the problems in Town Square Park that we don't like, and it's too blunt of an instrument. And I'm surprised Mr. Trainey especially takes this approach, Mr. Trainey being a well-known proponent of Second Amendment rights. This has the same sort of resonance to me, where you have a problem with a certain issue, and you want to, across the board, waive every other person who's not causing a problem's rights to engage in that activity. I think it's very paternalistic. I agree that it makes it easier to address the problems in Town Square Park, but sometimes we have to take the harder approach that's the right approach, and that's the case here. If there's bad behavior going on in Town Square Park, if people are smoking marijuana or spice, that's already illegal. We have to target it. We can't just say smoking of lawful substances by anybody in Town Square Park is illegal as a way of doing a shortcut to that. I think it's bad government, it's bad policy, and if you haven't guessed, I'm going to vote no.
Really? Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Flynn?
I guess I'm not quite as excited about this as my colleague from South Anchorage. But I do concur with Mr. McGee's comments. I'm not a fan of cigarette smoke. I don't have the perhaps as strong a reaction as he does, or for example, my wife does. But, correlation does not in and of itself imply causation. Just because you're smoking in Town Square Park does not mean you're misbehaving in Town Square Park. You may work in one of the many businesses that are in the area that does not allow smoking indoors, since we outlawed it. And you want to go out, perhaps, and indulge a habit, which may or may not be good for you, but it's your habit nonetheless. And on a nice day like today, I can imagine that if I were a smoker and I worked downtown, I would like to be able to sit in the park and enjoy a cigarette. Granted, there are people who are misbehaving in Town Square Park. Yes, we need to take steps to eradicate that negative behavior, but I don't think banning smoking is the way to do it. In fact, in some ways, if we could set aside a corner of the park and encourage responsible smokers to use it, maybe it would help drive out the bad folks. I think that might be a more surgical and appropriate approach than this one. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Madam Chair disappeared, so
Mr. Whittleton.
Thank you. I smoked my last cigarette 34 years, 6 months, and 19 days ago. I smoked for 10 years. It is a very unfortunate habit and addiction. Like Mr. McGee, I can't stand being near smoke. But I'm very uncomfortable regulating illegal behavior by banning smoking in this park. I walk through that park every chance I'm near it just to see it. See some bad behavior, but I see a lot of people who may be smoking, and actually they remind me quite a lot of myself when I was a teenager in early 20s. A little rough looking, smoking on cigarettes nonstop, but you come around, and I sure enjoyed a sunny day in a park. if hanging out in the park is loitering and that's wrong, what's the park for? So anyways, I won't be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Falls, did you have a comment, sir? You're on the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Just to close the loop on the previous question from Assemblymember Demboski, there are actually two provisions that address the consumption of marijuana. One is in the secondhand smoking ban. That is the one that incorporates marijuana by defining smoking to mean inhaling, exhaling, burning, or carrying any lighted tobacco or marijuana product. But there is a separate provision which addresses consumption of marijuana in a public place. It reads more broadly, it is unlawful for any person to knowingly consume marijuana when the person is upon a public place or outdoors on property adjacent to a public place without the consent of the owner. In that section, marijuana consumption is defined by reference to state law much more broadly and would it does encompass the act of ingesting, inhaling, or otherwise inducing marijuana into the human body, which I suspect would cover vaping.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Peterson, sir, on the issue in front of us.
Thank you, Mr. Training, Mr. Vice Chair, excuse me. It'll be 34 years come the 4th of July since I quit smoking cigarettes. And my father did get free cigarettes when he was in the military in World War II, died of lung cancer in 1999. So I'm not a real big proponent of smoking cigarettes. So I will be supporting this ordinance. But I think Ms. Gerard brought up an interesting subject that we, at some point in time, are going to have to find a solution to, is where we have legalized marijuana and we have stores that will be opening soon, but there will be nowhere for a tourist who comes here to legally smoke the stuff. And we're going to be collecting taxes on it, so I believe it's irresponsible for us to not provide somewhere for those individuals to legally partake. And so at a later date, we'll have to address that subject. But as far as this particular ordinance goes, I'm going to be in favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Dunbar.
So as long as we're confessing, I've never smoked a cigarette. I don't know why you guys are so bad. I think it's actually less common in my generation than it used to be, and smoking continues to decline. I will be supporting this ordinance, although I do, and I apologize for again, perhaps messing up the procedure a little bit, but I do think we need to address the point that the woman, she is, brought up about the fact that there is non-tobacco nicotine-laced substances. You have an amendment for that one as well? Okay. Just, I'm glad we resolved that. So I wanted to just highlight something that Mr. Evans said. He said, this is targeted at problems in Town Square Park, and I agree, and that's actually why I'm supporting it, because I do agree that this can be a little bit heavy-handed, a little bit paternalistic, but I'm sure we've all received messages, and indeed we've heard public testimony of people saying there is something specific about Town Square Park, that we have unique problems in Town Square Park right now, and the public feels very strongly that we should do something about it. And so we are going to increase police patrols. We have the mayor's office has removed a problematic fountain. And this to me is, if it was just this, and this was supposed to be our silver bullet, I wouldn't support it. But I see this as part of a very larger effort to transform Town Square Park. So although I don't have a story of overcoming addiction in this regard, I will be supporting this particular provision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Croft.
Yeah, I never smoked cigarettes with any regularity. I chewed, though, from high school on, essentially, and was you can actually still, I think still, but could chew on the House floor. So I was when I voted for the tobacco tax, and even more, if you can imagine, disgusting habit than smoking. I guess carrying on from Assemblyman Dunbar's comments, this has been a very good debate and a lot of good points on both sides. I'm uncomfortable with this solution as a general purpose or frequent one, but I do think there's something unique about Town Square Times Square too, but our town square that has been lost and that we're trying to regain. It's a very confined space. As we said in the amendment debate, I wish we'd applied it more generally to that entire space, but I do think it's appropriate to try this as we try to regain it. Let's not be too dramatic. We prohibit various things, skateboarding, or we'll encourage it here and discourage it here, so that it doesn't have to mean that this is the end of the world in terms of civil liberties. This is an attempt to, and we can watch and see whether it accomplishes the goals that we have in any meaningful way, accomplishes them but sacrifices other things. But I think because of this uniqueness of this situation, I'm willing to try it here with all the reservations that people have articulated.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Starr?
I think it's always important that we remember what the question is in front of us and we don't stray. I don't particularly care who has smoked or who thinks it's bad. So if the question in front of us was to prohibit things that, were harmful for us, then throw in all the things that are harmful for us and prohibit all of that. So it is targeted legislation towards a specific group. You all know what I do, and I fly. I've seen 17 different nationalities this week alone, and the world smokes. I mean, it does, and it likes to feel comfortable when it's traveling on vacation that it's well received for the areas that it's traveling to. The Europeans smoke. It's not uncommon. So the problem is two here, and I'm more with Mr. Croft. I didn't quite get how you were positioned to vote here, but to target a user group in a way that we're saying, hey, move on, is perhaps detrimental for those user groups that we don't want to have move on. I'd love nothing better than the Europeans feel comfortable to sit down outside the pack and smoke and laugh and enjoy the flowers, but instead they move on to where else do they go? I don't know. But it is a concern. I've heard more recently that people don't find Anchorage beautiful, or in other words, pretty or accommodating. They say, where else can we go? And that's frustrating for me because I want them to be here, not just on 4th Avenue buying T-shirts. I think they need to roam and see all of it. So are we just going to push the vaping and all that across the street or to another alley or behind City Hall? Probably. That's typically what happens when we have them move on. The campers spread out into different places. So I think we have an isolated issue in Town Square Park that's going to be solved perhaps a different way than just vaping and smoking or targeting groups that we find offensive. I don't find it the right way to go. So if Mr. Croft, that's how eloquently you were talking about that, I would support you in voting no on this.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Mr. Steele?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My point of my amendment was just to give some freedom to the PAC. But I have a real problem with us saying moving folks out of the park and basically saying you can't smoke here. And my whole point was to try and get clubs at marijuana sales, or sales, but clubs for folks where folks can smoke. It's a big issue, and it's a personal freedom and a personal right that we're taking away. And I understand the argument about the good of the society in terms of exposure and so on and so forth. But if not in the park, where? Where's a better place? And I think it was Mr. Starr that said, well, they'll move across the street into the alley. Or I don't think it does what we want to do. It's a short-term fix that takes away personal freedoms. Anyway, so I told Mr. Trainee I'd vote for it if he voted for my change to the PAC land. But I'm going to have to renege.
I got another amendment.
Outside 3 o'clock. Mr. Trainee.
I have an amendment on, cannot trust politicians. I have an amendment on line 16, after tobacco. I want it to say comma, nicotine, comma, in deference to Kate Guyard.
Do you have a second, Mr. Trainee? Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. You're in the queue on Mr. Trainee's amendment, or?
Oh, not really. I was on the main motion, but I'll speak to it since he made it. I think Kate made a good point. I mean, if you're going to go to the route of saying you can't vape, I think you need to make sure you articulate appropriately what you meant, and that means, I'm assuming, all vaping. So I think that's consistent with Mr. Trainee's intent, so I'm fine with it.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. There's no one else in the queue. We're voting on Mr. Trainee's amendment. Please vote. The amendment. One. Thank you. That amendment passed 9-2. We are now at the main motion. And Ms. Dombrowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Trainee, you almost got me this year.
That's right. She'll have a chance in 18 and 19.
Well, no. So, I'm going to take the unusual position of kind of arguing a position that I don't necessarily know that I'll vote for, but I'd like to remind people that we already can forbid smoking in serious areas of outdoor arenas, stadiums, and amphitheaters. And as I recall, we have concerts and whatnot in Town Square Park sometimes, hence amphitheater. So for those that are making the argument that this is somehow groundbreaking, I don't know that it necessarily is, frankly, because I think there's probably other areas that we can ban it pursuant to current code. So I go back and forth on this one. I didn't support the smoking ban initially, still don't. But with that said, I mean, if you're going to go that way, I can understand where Mr. Trainee's going. I had the pleasure of walking through Town Square Park the week marijuana it passed, and I was half a block away, and I could smell somebody smoking marijuana in the park. So I think we dealt with that with the marijuana ordinance. That's why I was asking Mr. Falsey specifically what did that cover, because I think that underlying answer dictated for me probably where I would go with this. But with that said, I would just like to remind people that we do have the ability, and currently in code it is articulated that areas, stadiums, or amphitheaters. So it's nothing new, really.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. There's no one else in the queue. We were voting on the main motion. Please vote.
As amended.
As amended. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. That motion fails 5-6. Okay, we are now at agenda item 14M, AO 2016-71.
Madam Chair, I apologize. I've overstated my child care window. I need to run.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Enjoy your evening. Ordinance number 2016-71, Table of Dimensional Standards, Commercial Industrial District, and Technical Amendment to allow the B3 district maximum height of structures to increase to 75 feet when on a portion of the UMED district. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body? Please give me a motion and a second.
Move to approve.
Thank you. Ms. Dombrowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The thing that caught my eye in this one is anytime we're changing height allowances, it tends to be something very passionate that the community councils weigh in on. And I haven't seen significant, I mean, we're waiving P&Z reviews, so what's the logic behind that?
This was presented to the University Area Community Council, and it did receive a recommendation of approval from the University Area Community Council.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Can you please state your name?
Yes.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, I apologize. Terry Schoenthal, Terry, last name Schoenthal, and I am the current planning manager.
Thank you. Terry, I saw the University Area's Community Council's notes right here, but my question being, typically something like this obviously gets passionate, but what's the rationale in bypassing Planning and Zoning Commission?
The rationale for bypassing the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the Planning and Zoning Commission generally approved of that, or it was brought up to them as an informational item, but the rationale for bypassing was that this was an unintended consequence of the changes to Title 21. That Title 21 was modified under new Title 21 that prohibited heights above 45 feet, where previously there had been no height limitation. The rest of the UMed district has a height limitation of 75 feet in PLI lands, and it was intended that this area would also have the same height limitations. At some point, it was considered that the area would be rezoned to PLI, but the fact is that the B3 zoning, which the hospital is in, is far more suitable to a hospital use than a PLI zone is. So the hospital use is conditional use in a PLI zone. It's an approved use in a B3 zone.
Okay, so I was trying to thumb through this because I seem to recall seeing something where there might be a couple projects in queue right now that are kind of waiting for this change. Is that right?
Through the chair, Ms. Demboski, that is correct. Quite possibly the largest non-roadway construction project in Anchorage is currently scheduled to start this summer. It's the dental clinic and parking garage in the ANTH hospital area. It's being put forward by the South Central Foundation, and it really is stymied unless we make this correction. So it both required a timely action as well as an action to address what we believe is really an unintended consequence of Title 21.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the administration's acknowledgement of sometimes, especially when there are unintended consequences, it is appropriate to waive P&Z review. I know in the past they've had issues with that, but I do appreciate them coming around and realizing that it's not only appropriate, but sometimes it's needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Demboski. There's no one else in the queue. Please vote. That ordinance was approved 10-0. Mr. Flynn is excused. Next item on the agenda is item 14N, AO 2016-68, amending Anchorage Municipal Code, Chapter 28.90, regarding election recount. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Sir, would you like to testify? Come on up. Public hearing is open.
No, this wasn't for the purpose of testifying, but the last vote was posted in error. It had Madam Chair, it had you absent.
Thank you for being so observant. Don't worry about it. Thank you. Again, AO 2016-68, amending Anchorage Municipal Code, Chapter 28.90, regarding election recount. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We discussed this at the Ethics and Election Committee meeting, and the clerk's office made a very good argument that I thought persuaded me that it was important that in some situations they were allowed to do a recount if they felt it might induce more confidence in our elections by the public. And so I thought that made perfect sense, especially in the case of the most recent election when there was a difference of just 2 votes and a very, very important issue in Girdwood. So in the history of Alaska politics has had numerous extremely close elections over the years. And so I think this makes perfect sense, and I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. There's no one else in the queue. Please vote. That item is approved. The next item on the agenda, no special orders. The next item on the agenda is audience participation. Anyone like to be heard? Please come to the podium. We have 3 minutes. State your name, spell your last.
Hello, my name is Jason Negri, H-E-R-E. I'm here to speak about their drinking water. Basically, I don't know if you were aware of an interview done with Lisa Murkowski where she discussed Chinese fluoride in our water supply. And the issue with this is that it's never been safety tested for human consumption. So I was discussing earlier with Dick Traney here and also with Demboski, maybe do an investigation to find out whether or not this has actually been safety tested. And basically I'm asking the people here to do their job and do what's right and be diligent and find out about this issue, because we shouldn't be dumping stuff that has never been approved for human consumption in our water supply. And it's an issue that needs to be investigated. So I'm asking for an investigation of this.
Thank you, sir. There are no questions. Anyone else wish to be heard?
Well, I still have my 3 minutes. I just want to...
I'm sorry. I thought you were finished. You have...
Well, maybe I can address individual assembly member. Maybe I'd like to address Eric Croft on this issue. That do you feel like we should be investigating whether or not this stuff has ever been safety tested for human consumption?
Sir, excuse me. You get to testify but not ask questions to assembly members. Thank you.
Well, then
you can
this is a
speak to them
test.
offline.
This is a
Yeah.
test then. No.
No. Anything else you'd like to say, sir?
Okay, well, I'll discuss this with you on an individual basis,
would
but
be
I just
great.
want to let you know that this is an issue that I care about and that should be cared about also by the assembly members here, because it's about you doing your job correctly and doing your due diligence in order to represent the people right. So it'd be definitely something you should look into.
Thank you, sir. Welcome. Please state your name, spell your last.
Good evening. My name is Ron L-L-E-V-A, and I'm here tonight to request through the mayor and the assembly to declare a weapons turn-in day. The day would allow anyone to turn over a gun or a firearm to the city to have it destroyed. This day shall be dedicated to all those who are victims of crime, especially those of Orlando, Aurora, Stony Brook, San Bernardino, Paris, Belgium. Wherever a victim is, we can take an action voluntarily to turn in these weapons. I ask for municipal assistance through law enforcement, and I'd also request any evidence weapons that are currently in our evidence locker be turned over and destroyed publicly. As a holder of an FFL, a federal firearms license myself, and as a past contractor who has auctioned guns for the municipality, I no longer in good conscience can do it because of the easiness of selling a weapon and having it reused in a crime. So I have withdrawn my name from my FFL via my company, and I also have withdrawn my name from a bid with the municipality to auction the guns. Should evidence weapons be sold, or any other weapons, let them only be sold to other FFL holders. This would minimize the risk to the municipality in a form of a liability. Nye, a Frontier Ford, dropped a gun on the back of his boat. He sued everyone, right down to the manufacturer, and got $4.2 million. I don't believe the taxpayers should be put at that risk. No vendor carries that kind of liability insurance, and I believe the municipality will be on the hook. Secondly, I personally would not want to be robbed or harmed by a weapon I sold on the behalf of the municipality, as may have been in the case of the weapon that was used to shoot at the troopers just recently. I personally will donate 2 weapons myself. Mr. Traney can identify these 2 as an AK-47 and an AK-15, both assault weapons. I will offer the chop saw I will offer the blades, I will offer the torches to cut them up. Thirdly, this token gesture cannot question gun rights, as no laws are being created or to enforce rights. I can summarize by saying, in good conscience, I want all of you to think of this, and may this gesture be challenged to the rest of the mayors of the state and the governor and to the rest of the mayors of the nation, that it go viral and that we volunteer in good conscience to destroy the surplus weapons that cause such harm to victims and to their families.
Thank you, Mr. Labor. I just have to make a really quick point. When I did like this, I wasn't waving.
You were shaming me?
No. You asked me.
I own a gun, you know.
You asked me to do this when there was a minute left, and I did that. But thank you. Mr. Trainee has a question.
Sure.
That's not an AK-47, Ron. That's an AKS. There's a difference.
Oh, well, it's an automatic assault weapon,
No,
Dick.
it's not. It's a semi-automatic.
Well, if they file off that pin and you know it, you're a machine gun holder.
So it's not an assault
well,
weapon.
Dick, it kills.
A 30-30 in Indian times was an
It
assault
kills.
weapon.
Mr. Trainee.
Sorry.
Do you have another question?
Mr. Trainee. Thank you, Mr. Trainee.
You can't school me in guns, Dick.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Anyone else wish to be heard? Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too.
Thank you.
School them in guns.
Please come to the podium, ma'am, and state your name and spell your last. Thank you.
Madam Assembly Chairwoman and Assembly members, my name is Barbara Bachmeier, B-A-C-H-M-E-I-E-R. I'll read my statement in order to use my time most efficiently. I'm speaking for 5 households who live in the area of Hunt Circle. Mr. Weddleton informed me earlier that there's a similar problem going on in South Anchorage. I live at 841 Hunt Circle in East Anchorage. 1 year ago, my neighbor Paul Lalich of 841 Hunt Circle died. He left a will and assigned an executrix, but she does not want to serve in this capacity. I told her how she can recuse herself, but she's not done that either. So after 1 year, the will has not been entered into probate. Imagine for yourselves if your neighbor died and all of a sudden squatters moved in and they wouldn't leave. This is what I've been experiencing for over a year. Soon after Paul's death, 6 or so squatters moved into Paul's home. In the last year, excuse me. In the last year, I called APD when the squatters broke municipal ordinances. They cut down nearly every mature tree in Paul's backyard and then threw the refuse into the Muni property, it's a green belt, and scattered other parts of the refuse around the yards. They performed long-term auto repair on Hunt Circle using a vehicle with license plates tagged as expiring in 2014. They routinely parked their vehicles, all of them, in the driveway such that the vehicles blocked the sidewalk and also entered into the roadway. During the winter, they established a pattern of warming up their vehicles around midnight. Each of the vehicles were tuned to play loud radio music during the warm-up, and it disturbed the neighbors' sleep. One night, I got out of bed, I walked to the cars, I turned them off. The squatters then called the police, and the police seemed interested in arresting me for rifling through the car. All I did was turn it off so that we all could get some sleep and some peace. One of the 2 responding APD officers tried hard to create an antagonistic dispute between the 2 of us. Twice I informed the officer the conversation was over. After my 3rd announcement, the officer's partner got the message, and he ended everything, and they walked back to their vehicles. I reported this to the APD chain of command and was interviewed about the topic, but I've never received any kind of response. The squatters have aimed their indoor speakers at my backyard and played rap lyrics very loudly. Oh, no.
Can you sum up, please? Yeah, sorry, but can you sum up?
Okay, well, the point of the matter is I would like a comprehensive solution to this problem. I mean, I could go on and on about how the squatters have behaved disrespectfully to me, to the neighbors, and we've just had it. I am here by myself, but there are 5 other families who are up in arms about this. I talked to a former legislator who said this reminds him of what happened in the 80s when the economy took a nosedive. And we kind of predict that this might happen again if the legislature is correct and the governor is correct in telling us that the economy is in bad shape.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
We need a comprehensive program to address the squatters that are here now and will come later.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good evening. Anyone else wish to be heard?
Good evening. My name is Sabrina Martino, M-A-R-T-I-N-O, and I would like to ask you to form a research committee to investigate the dosage of fluoride that's being dispensed through the municipal water supply. Told it's added to prevent dental cavities, so that means it's given as a medicine. And usually when a medicine is given, there's a certain dose that's supposed to be taken. When it's added to the water, it's very hard to control the dose. And there have been many adverse reactions from overfluoridation. So I would like to request a safety investigation be conducted and that the results be made publicly available. I spoke with a few people already, and I can't get any answers on where I can find any information on any checks and balances that are in effect. And I think that it's something that should be addressed. So I would really like you guys to look into this and investigate how much people are taking, how much people need. Is it safe to ingest it? The last I saw, we were using stuff from China that's toxic. So I would just like some information on the safety of the product that's being used and for it to be made publicly available.
Thank you so much. Anyone else wish to be heard? You're welcome. Good evening.
My name is Susan Kanen. That's K-A-N-E-N. And many of you have heard me speak before on the issue of fluoridation, but there are a few new people. And again, fluoridation is a medicine that we must realize that is part of, need to have an informed consent. And you saw earlier how we've been introducing a petition. This petition is a result of your non-due diligence. With a petition, we are allowed to get the removal of the fluoridation municipal code off the books and fluoridation here in Anchorage. And you would be totally taken out of the equation. I would love to see that happen. I don't know if we'll have the strength to do that, but people need to be informed. And not doing research on this and due diligence and squashing the safety investigation that was already underway is atrocious. And this information will be coming out as more people are being asked to sign a petition to take the municipal code off the books. You don't even need to be in this business of fluoridating, and it is up to each one of you. Sir, may I have a look there? Each one of you, and I know we lost Mr. Flynn there. He saw us coming, but you are the only one responsible for writing that prescription. And right now, fluoride is a non-approved drug by the FDA. And you have to have a prescription to write a pill for it, but they're making drugs that are non-approved. They're experimental drugs. I've been experimenting on. I was born 53. Anchorage was fluoridated since 53. I don't believe there was a code, and this is where I need to be informed, up to about 2004, which is the law right now that's on the books. We were fluoridating people for 50 years without any legal authority to do so. That's atrocious. Now, I want to show persons the picture of the actual stuff that we have in Ekludna. You know what it says on the bag? Blow it up. It says, fatal if swallowed. Right there on the bag. And I'm talking with Lisa Murkowski. I talked to her on Saturday in person, and I'm giving her information about the actual analytical analysis of this stuff. We don't have the trace minerals and contaminants that are in there that are known to be in there, including radionucleotides. We don't need any more radioactivity put into our water. Whether we get this going, Whether we get it off the law, you've got a lot of work to do on this issue. The specifications in your municipal AWWU are in error. In chemical, you allow more heavy metals than you should. You've got to correct that. But let's just get out of this business. Let's stop the fight. There are those that religiously believe in it, and there's those that religiously don't, but the science is in question. I've worked 10 years with Dr. Mark Edwards from Flint, Michigan. That was a failure of government, and this is a failure of government, that you have not addressed this issue at all and really studied it. And people, I just hope in Anchorage, will hear this, get themselves informed, sign this petition, get this off the municipal code. You don't belong in this business.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Anyone else wish to be heard?
Good evening. Thank you very much. My name is Lynette Moreno-Haynes, and I've been before this assembly, but I see there's new faces now. Congratulations. And what I came here for tonight was there's some different, like 3 or 4 different issues. Was first when I had rented a facility because I'm running for U.S. Congress, and I rented a park. When I rented the park, it was on a holiday, Memorial Day, and there wasn't any kind of supervision at that park. So when I got there, I had my permit, and it cost $165 to rent it for 4 hours. And what happened was that there was another group there, so I had a hard time getting the other group out of there. But I would like to know if you can have some kind of supervision at these parks when you rent them out. Also, I wanted to do a float this year, but I found out that I had to be a elected official in order to do the 4th of July event. And then they told me I could do actually a vendor type operation, and that costs $275. People like me, you guys have been in this boat before. We don't have a lot of money, and we're trying to get the word out there that we're running. So I think that it's very discriminatory that you let elected officials in the parade, but other people you keep out. Also, there is another issue I had with the mayor, but I see that he left already. I had been a cab driver for 34 years in the city, and the Anchorage Transportation Commission already voted on an issue that they should have brought up to you guys. They voted against it. And what it was that the Alaska Yellow Cab is being charged for every credit card transaction. And that cost is really, really snowballing. The effect of it is such a tremendous amount that they fear that they will not be able to operate. They wanted to be able to charge the public $1 for the processing for the credit card transactions. Credit cards are convenience. If you don't have cash, they're convenience. And you can go to all major cities and you can pay by credit card. And Las Vegas, they charge quite a bit for a credit card transaction. So I would like you to check into that. The Anchorage Transportation Commission already voted no, but I would like that brought back up amongst the Assembly and the public. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome.
Hi again. My name's Ed Larrivee, L-A-R-R-I-V's Victory, E-2. I just want to remind you all, be careful when you make gun laws, because I personally feel with my heart that's not the gun or weapon that kills, it's the person behind the gun or holding the gun. That's the one that kills. They're the weapon. And the reason why I say that, because all the things that have been happening, like in Florida State, you know, had there been a gunslinger there that was trained, maybe that guy wouldn't have killed so many people, and maybe he wouldn't have wounded so many people. So be careful whenever you make these zones, no weapon zones. Have in mind the bad guy or the crazy bad guy will be looking at that saying, "Oh, what a good opportunity," you know. So you have to really be careful. Another thing is noise. There ought to be a time when these boom boxes inside these cars in the middle of the night, like 2 in the morning, should be outlawed. Because, if they are outlawed now, I'm hearing it off of Faulkner Street next to Taco Bell. I'm hearing it, and it is loud. It rattles things inside my house. So, there ought to be something, some sort of enforcement. And another thing is, a third point is, we are still getting gasoline trucks there, tandem trucks, coming on Faulkner Street, going to a convenience store to reload their gasoline. And now we're also getting propane. Usually comes Wednesday or Thursday around 2 to 2:30 in the afternoon. They used to do it at night, but now they're bold. They're just coming there, and there's a lot of people that live there. There's a lot of people walking the streets. It's near Tudor. I'm not saying that something would happen, but why take that chance? How does it benefit the people that live there? And must be over 500 people, probably more than that, probably thousands. But, we need to realize that we live in a society where these things happen, and we have to take control of it. Like the smoking amendment. How trivial is that compared to what I'm talking about? Start concentrating more on more important stuff, and save lives. Who knows? Well, anyway, any questions?
No, thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to be heard? Okay, any assembly comments? Second. Meeting's adjourned. Good night. Thank you.